masing-masing jurnal. Jangan lupa cek ketentuan dan persyaratan di website kami ya. Selanjutnya, tim sekretariat jurnal akan memproses naskah yang telah masuk sesuai ketentuan dan prosedur yang berlaku. Naskah yang diterima untuk diproses penerbitan akan menjalani serangkaian proses review dan quality control untuk menjamin kualitas naskah yang akan diterbitkan pada jurnal. Jurnal BBRSEKP memiliki dewan penyunting berkualifikasi sesuai dengan bidang ilmu yang mewakili bidang ilmu pengetahuan, teknologi, dan seni. Selain itu, kami juga melibatkan mitra bestari berkualifikasi sesuai dengan bidang ilmu jurnal dari berbagai perguruan tinggi atau badan penelitian dan pengembangan serta industri yang berbeda untuk mereview naskah secara objektif. Penulis atau pengguna layanan dapat memantau perkembangan proses layanan naskahnya melalui OJS. Kami memiliki nomor kontak tim sekretariat yang siap melayani pengguna layanan pada hari dan jam kerja dalam proses pengelolaan dan penerbitan naskah dari berbagai perguruan tinggi atau badan penelitian dan pengembangan serta industri yang berbeda untuk mereview naskah secara objektif. Penulis atau pengguna layanan dapat memantau perkembangan proses layanan naskahnya melalui OJS. Kami memiliki nomor kontak tim sekretariat yang siap melayani pengguna layanan pada hari dan jam kerja dalam proses pengelolaan dan penerbitan naskah dari berbagai perguruan tinggi atau badan penelitian dan pengembangan serta industri yang berbeda untuk mereview naskah secara objektif. Penulis atau pengguna layanan dapat memantau perkembangan proses layanan naskahnya melalui OJS. Kami memiliki nomor kontak tim sekretariat yang siap melayani pengguna layanan pada hari dan jam kerja dalam proses pengelolaan dan penerbitan naskah dari berbagai perguruan tinggi atau badan penelitian dan pengembangan serta industri yang berbeda untuk mereview naskah secara objektif. Penulis atau pengguna layanan dapat memantau perkembangan proses layanan naskahnya melalui OJS. Kami memiliki nomor kontak tim sekretariat yang siap melayani pengguna layanan pada hari dan jam kerja dalam proses pengelolaan dan penerbitan naskah dari berbagai perguruan tinggi atau badan penelitian dan pengembangan serta industri yang berbeda untuk mereview naskah secara objektif. Penulis atau pengguna layanan dapat memantau perkembangan proses layanan naskahnya melalui OJS. Kami memiliki nomor kontak tim sekretariat yang siap melayani pengguna layanan pada hari dan jam kerja dalam proses pengelolaan dan penerbitan naskah dari berbagai perguruan tinggi atau badan penelitian dan pengembangan.
Balai Besar Riset Sosial Ekonomi Kelautan dan Perikanan melanjutkan rangkaian pelaksanaan riset penerapan model integrasi sosial ekonomi kelautan. Ini merupakan tahap implementasi model korporasi bisnis perikanan budidaya udang di Kabupaten Aceh Tamiang. Urgensi kegiatan ini adalah untuk mengukuhkan gapokan dan meningkatkan kapasitas gapokan terkait pengelolaan tandon, sedimen, dan ipal, serta kalender musim tanam dengan sistem rotasi dalam budidaya udang fanam. Riset penerapan model integrasi sosial ekonomi kelautan dan ditetapkan pengurusnya berdasarkan keputusan Kepala Dinas Pangan Kelautan dan Perikanan Kabupaten Aceh budidaya udang di Kabupaten. Dalam peningkatan kapasitas anggota gapokan dilaksanakan beberapa sesi pelatihan. Sesi pertama, Kepala Dinas Pangan Kelautan dan Perikanan Kabupaten Aceh Tamiang menjelaskan mengenai kebijakan pemerintah tentang pengembangan usaha budidaya udang di Kabupaten Aceh Tamiang. Pada sesi berikutnya, narasumber dari Balai Budidaya Air Paya Ujung Batai Aceh Besar melakukan monitoring terkait dengan penggunaan tandon, pengelolaan sedimen, pengendalian limbah, dan musim tanam dengan sistem rotasi pada budidaya udang faname. Setelah mengikuti pelatihan secara teoretik, selanjutnya dilakukan praktek lapang di kawasan klaster tambak udang di Desa Dagang Setia, Kecamatan Manyak.
Pelatihan tentang model integrasi sosial ekonomi kelautan dan perikanan yang dilakukan oleh bapak-bapak dan ibu-ibu dari BRSKPI terkait tentang capacity building untuk pembudidayaan. Kami melihat pelatihan kali ini memang tepat sasaran dari segi materi karena kita coba mengangkat persoalan yang real terjadi di lapangan, apa kendala masyarakat. Nah, kendala selama ini yang belum tersentuh adalah hal-hal yang seperti
Halo sahabat Bahari. Demi mensukseskan korporasi dan digitalisasi dalam pengembangan kampung perikanan budidaya di Desa Pandembangan, Kecamatan Cilongo, Kabupaten Banyumas, Balai Besar Riset Sosial Ekonomi Kelautan dan Perikanan bersinergi bersama Badan Riset Sumber Daya Manusia Kelautan dan Perikanan, pemerintah desa, Smart Village Nusantara, Agri-Fisheries, serta pemangku kepentingan lainnya membangun dan mengembangkan Smart Fisheries Village atau SFV. Smart Fisheries Village merupakan konsep pembangunan desa perikanan yang berbasis penerapan teknologi informasi komunikasi, manajemen tepat guna, dan keberlanjutan, serta meningkatkan ekonomi yang berada di tengah-tengah program Kampung Budidaya dan Desa Inovasi atau Desa Mitra. Konsep ini akan mengubah desa perikanan dari kesan termarginalkan menjadi lebih maju dan tertata dengan baik. Tidak hanya secara fisik, namun juga peningkatan daya saing desa, serta terjadi peningkatan kapasitas sumber daya manusia, termasuk dalam hal percepatan pemanfaatan sarana teknologi digital. Smart Fisheries Village diharapkan dapat menumbuhkan perekonomian kawasan, membuka lapangan pekerjaan untuk masyarakat, menjaga lingkungan lestari, dan tentunya berbasis digital. Untuk mencapai tujuan tersebut diperlukan kontribusi penyuluhan, pendidikan, dan pelatihan mendukung role model Smart Fisheries Village. Desa Pandembangan menjadi lokasi pilot project SFV karena memiliki potensi perikanan yang besar. Pelaku utama mengembangkan komoditas ikan nila, ikan mas, ikan
also shall benefit not only for Indonesia, but also for ASEAN communities for that matters, especially with the chairmanship of Indonesia. It shall be maximized through the participations of Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries by taking lead in blue economy within ASEAN. Conservation can belong to a country, but the diversification of special conservations can also be held by a private entity which is already implemented in some parts of the world. For this, we want to see which one brings more value and benefit to Indonesia, which we believe that it will all be the same, because whatever approaches we do, the value it brings shall return to Indonesia, to the country, and whatever our cost is shall be borne under the carbon cost. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear Bapak Nyoman, also Kepala BRSDM, I was present when His Excellency Ambassador Barito conveyed the message to Pak Menteri Trenggono that BRSDM is hoped to be the extension to establish a sustainable blue agenda. This training especially will not only be held this year. Hence, we hope that it'll be a continuous, ongoing agenda for us to share that on the ever-evolving knowledge, experience, and findings on blue economy. Further, we can conduct comparative studies, establish a Blue Carbon World Forum on which the Seychelles is more than happy to assist and facilitate. So with that, I have the honor to introduce our Blue Economy team that Ambassador Nico has put up to support these programs. Mr. Jonathan Turner, please rise. Yes. Mr. Andrew Hamflet, and Mr. Ralph Kami, who is online, who are all our Blue Economy practitioners, very committed towards ocean protections from the Blue Solutions Company. And through this training, we hope to understand and socialize the introduction about blue carbon, blue economy, and how to captivate the ocean carbon for the resilience of the country, especially for the countries this big like Indonesia. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Jody Pratama. Next, I would like to invite the head of BRSDM to deliver opening remarks. Please welcome Mr. Inyoman Radiarta.
Terima kasih MC. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kalau mic-nya saya dengan mic-nya MC beda kelihatannya. Mic-nya MC lebih enak suaranya. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera buat kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Very good morning, our colleagues from UK, the UK Blue Economy Team of Seychelles. Yang saya hormati Duta Besar Republik Seychelles, Pak Nico Barito, dalam hal ini diwakili oleh Pak Jordi. Our colleagues from UK Blue Economic Solution, Mr. Jonathan Turner, thank you very much for your time, and then we are very appreciate. And then Mr. Andrew Hamflet, thank you also. And Mr. Ralph Chami, so who participate through this training through online. Bapak Ibu para pejabat lingkup Kementerian Kelautan dan Perikanan, para peserta TOT, dan hadirin sekalian yang hadir baik luring ataupun hadir secara daring. Kalau saya dapat laporan yang hadir secara daring ada sekitar 300-an orang ya. 300 lebih. So Mr. Andrew, our TOT, our training of trainer today, participates not only in this room, but also through online system. About more than 300 participants join through a Zoom meeting. So to make a balance, previously Pak Jordi already talked with English, so now I will talk with bahasa. Saya kira pertama-tama marilah kita panjatkan puji syukur kita kehadirat Tuhan Yang Maha Esa, di mana pada pagi yang cerah hari ini kita masih dipertemukan dalam kondisi sehat walafiat untuk mengikuti kegiatan Training of Trainer atau TOT on the Blue Economic Program yang diselenggarakan. Saya kira ini kegiatan ini Pak Jordia bukan merupakan kegiatan yang pertama, merupakan rangkaian kegiatan kolaborasi antara Kementerian Kelautan dan Perikanan dan pemerintah Seychelles yang sudah kita inisiasi sejak tahun 2021 ya, 2021. Jadi ini merupakan rangkaian sharing terkait penajaman blue economy. So this event actually is not a new event. We already conducted a previous event in last year regarding how we share our the decision or implementation of a blue economy from a previous country. Last year we invite a former president of Seychelles to talk about his experience on how to build the blue economic implementation, mainly on blue bonds, more on the tourism activity. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati, saya kira Kementerian Kelautan dan Perikanan telah mencanangkan 5 program prioritas yang berlandaskan pada blue economy sebagai fondasi. Dari kelima program prioritas tersebut, di antaranya yaitu perluasan kawasan konservasi di seluruh perairan Indonesia yang diharapkan bisa mencapai 30%. Kemudian yang kedua adalah penerapan penangkapan ikan terukur berbasis kuota dan zona penangkapan dalam rangka peningkatan pendapatan negara bukan pajak ataupun PNBP. Kemudian yang ketiga adalah pengembangan perikanan budidaya, baik budidaya laut, pesisir, ataupun pendalaman. Dengan mengutamakan 4 komoditas utama, yaitu pertama, lobster, udang. Pertama udang, lobster, kepiting, dan rumput laut. Program prioritas keempat adalah pemanfaatan pulau-pulau kecil, kawasan pesisir, sesuai dengan aturan secara berkelanjutan. Dan yang kelima adalah program peduli lingkungan, khususnya sampah plastik melalui Gerakan Nasional Bulan Cinta Laut. Saya kira kelima program tersebut yang sudah berlandaskan blue economy, yang saat ini tim kerja menteri telah menyusun roadmap dari pengembangan blue economy tersebut. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati, ekosistem karbon biru juga dapat dimanfaatkan sebagai sumber ekonomi. Jadi dalam pemanfaatan sumber daya alam yang ada, concern KKP ke depan adalah terkait dengan sustainability, ekologi, lingkungan, dan tidak semata-mata berbasis pada pengungkit ekonomi. Jadi fondasinya adalah ekologinya seperti apa. Ekologi dipastikan baik dulu. Semua kegiatan harus berlandaskan pada ekologi. Sehingga seringkali Pak Menteri menyampaikan bahwa ekologi menjadi komandan dari seluruh program-program prioritas Kementerian Kelautan dan Perikanan. Berkenaan dengan hal tersebut, saya kira BRSDM-KP mengambil peran karena fungsi BRSDM-KP adalah sebagai supporting dalam pelaksanaan 5 program prioritas tersebut, saya kira pelaksanaan TOT pagi hari ini yang kalau saya perhatikan secara online juga diikuti dari berbagai kalangan, ya, dari berbagai jabatan fungsional yang ada, baik itu dosen, praktisi, widya iswara, fungsional pengelola lingkungan pesisir, analisa kebijakan, instruktur, dan lain sebagainya. Saya kira ini menjadi sangat baik untuk dilaksanakan, dan kami sangat mengapresiasi Pak Jordi. Sampaikan salam Pak Menteri ke Pak Dubes, bahwa KKP sangat mengapresiasi kegiatan TOT yang diselenggarakan pada pagi hari ini. Saya kira ini menjadi salah satu media pembelajaran, media sharing bersama antara pakar-pakar yang telah melakukan atau mengimplementasikan atau bahkan memiliki fresh pengetahuan baru terkait dengan blue economy tersebut. Kita memiliki 3 pakar Blue Economy Team Solution yang memang diundang khusus oleh pemerintah Seychelles untuk bisa sharing bersama dengan. Saya kira ini merupakan kesempatan yang sangat baik sekali ya. Harusnya Bu Norma, adik-adik juga diundang sini supaya penuh nih harusnya nih. Adik-adik AUP yang paling dekat lah, jangan online aja. Karena kalau offline bagi tamu kita akan kelihatan lebih gregetnya lebih bagus nih. Saya kemarin lupa mengingatkan. Harusnya adik-adik ikut juga di sini. Tadi saya di belakang saya sempat ngobrol-ngobrol sama Andrew. Lain kali kegiatan ini ya Pak Jordi ya, kegiatan ini kita adakan di kampus AUP aja. Ya, kampus AUP. Atau bahkan kalau mereka lagi ke lapangan, kampus mana? Kita adakan di situ untuk menaikkan nilai jual dari kampus-kampus kita. Selain juga sharing bersama. Ya tidak menutup kemungkinan juga kita tetap membuka Zoom gitu ya. Namun saya lebih senang kalau mereka hadir langsung di sini. Saya kira terkait dengan blue economy ini khususnya kalau kita perhatikan ya, jadi banyak sekali implementasi blue economy, baik dari ekosistem pesisir itu sendiri yang memiliki nilai ekonomi yang sangat tinggi. Oleh sebab itu Pak Menteri sangat concern sekali terkait dengan reklamasi dan isu-isu lainnya. Karena kalau kita perhatikan perairan dangkal di mana matahari bisa tembus sampai ke dasarnya itu merupakan perairan yang sangat subur, memberikan kontribusi ekonomi yang sangat signifikan. Selain dengan perairan-perairan dalam terkait dengan potensi perikanan yang dimiliki. Oleh sebab itu saat ini Kementerian Kelautan dan Perikanan melalui Direktur Jenderal Pengelolaan Ruang Laut telah menyusun strategi yang juga masuk dalam roadmap Blue Economy berupa Ocean Accounting. Di mana Ocean Accounting itu akan melihat seberapa besar sebenarnya potensi pesisir yang kita miliki. Ekosistem mangrove, terumbu karang, lamun, rawa, pesisir, bagaimana kontribusi terhadap blue carbon. Bagaimana kontribusi sinergis terhadap perkembangan pariwisata yang tentunya tidak merusak ekosistem pesisir tersebut. Jadi kalau laut sehat, ikan tentunya banyak. Ini yang ingin dipastikan oleh Kementerian Kelautan dan Perikanan. Melalui 5 program prioritas tersebut, harapannya ini saling mendongkrak sehingga memastikan keberlanjutan ketersediaan ikan secara berkelanjutan. Nah, saya kira pada pagi hari ini kita kedatangan 3 pembicara yang sangat kompeten, meskipun pakai bahasanya bahasa Jawa gitu ya. Tapi nggak apa-apa, kan ada slide-slide-nya yang bisa kita perhatikan, dan saya yakin juga Bapak Ibu sudah familiar lah dengan bahasa Jawa. Jadi semoga saja TOT pagi hari ini bisa bermanfaat bagi kita semua dan kita bisa mengambil pembelajaran dan bisa sharing bersama. Sharing bersama dengan para pakar, para narasumber yang merupakan anggota daripada UK Blue Economic Solution. Terakhir saya mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Pak Jordi, kepada Pak Niko Barito atas inisiasi dan konsistensi yang sudah diberikan kepada KKP dalam rangka sinergitas kita bersama untuk membawa ataupun berkomitmen dalam rangka menyiapkan konsep dan implementasi daripada Blue Economy untuk KKP. Dan juga saya mengucapkan terima kasih kepada panitia yang sudah menyiapkan acara pagi hari ini dengan baik. Semoga acara ini dapat berlangsung dengan baik dan kita dapat memperoleh manfaat. Demikian yang dapat saya sampaikan. Secara resmi saya membuka Training of Trainers on the Blue Economic Program. Terima kasih.
Kami mohon berkenan kepada Bapak Kepala BRSDM untuk dapat menyerahkan cenderamata kepada para pembicara. So ladies and gentlemen, our next section is for the software given by Mr. Inyoman Radiarta to the speakers. So I would like to invite Mr. Jonathan Turner and also Mr. Andrew Hamford to join us here. Dan kami mohon berkenan juga untuk Bapak Jody dan Bapak Rudi Alek dapat mendampingi Bapak Kepala Badan dalam penyerahan souvenir. Dan kepada Pak Jody kami mohon berkenan juga untuk menerima sebagai on behalf of Mr. Ralph Chami untuk dapat menerima souvenir yang dikhususkan kepada Mr. Ralph Chami. Kami persilakan. The first souvenir is for Mr. Jordi Pratama on behalf of Mr. Ralph Chami. The next is over from Mr. Inyoman Radiarta for Mr. Jonathan Turner. And the third is for Mr. Andrew Hamflet. Dan kami persilakan kembali pada Pak Rudi dan Pak Jordi untuk dapat foto bersama terlebih dahulu sebelum kembali duduk. Oke, baik Bapak. Kami silakan Bapak Ibu para peserta untuk dapat berdiri untuk ikut foto bersama. Tapi kami harapkan Bapak Ibu dapat sedikit merapat ke tengah. Okay, we move for the second set for the photo session with all of the audience here. Dan Bapak Ibu kami silakan dapat bergabung berdiri dan sedikit merapat ke tengah.
Oke, siap. 3, 2, 1. Sekali lagi, 1, 2, 3. Semangat. Oke, 3, 2, 1. Oke.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It was a sweet moment. Ladies and gentlemen, moving right along, we have 3 great speakers with 3 topics of the training to discuss about. And I guess all of you are excited to meet them. And I will like to invite the moderator of the first session is Mr. Andi Susmodo. Please welcome. And the time is yours.
Selamat pagi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua yang kami hormati Bapak Kepala Badan Riset Pengembangan SDM Kementerian Kelautan dan Perikanan, Bapak Kepala Balbes Sosek, Bapak Ibu sekalian yang hadir, baik yang online maupun yang offline pada acara Training for Trainers of Blue Economy pada pagi hari ini. Pada hari ini kita akan mendengarkan 3 narasumber. Satu orang narasumber, Mr. Ralph Chemi akan menyampaikan secara online dari United States of America, dari Amerika. Kemudian yang berikutnya secara offline ada Mr. Jonathan Turner, kemudian Mr. Andrew Hamlet. I would like to invite Mr. Jonathan Turner and Mr. Andrew Hamlet to sit with me here on the stage, please. Bapak Ibu sekalian, pagi hari ini kita akan bersama-sama mendengarkan, kita sama-sama learn about the blue economy yang merupakan program prioritas dari Kementerian Kelautan dan Perikanan, dan kita sudah ada narasumber yang akan menyampaikan 3 topik terkait dengan blue carbon, kemudian terkait dengan blue bond, dan terkait dengan marine protected area. Mari kita sama-sama untuk dengarkan bersama. Kita sama-sama belajar terkait dengan blue economy, kita dalami bersama. Sebagai pembicara pertama akan menyampaikan secara online yaitu Mr. Ralph Chemi.
Good morning, everyone.
Chemi, please, time is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the wonderful occasion and the invite. And distinguished guests, and good morning on your side. It's good evening on my end in Maryland, United States. What I'd like to do is, if I may share my screen. Let me know when you're able to see it. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay, thank you. Let me just stop the subtitles. Okay, so what I'd like to do is talk about, cast a kind of more general proposition and then funnel down to the blue economy. So the title of my talk is really about how do we go about putting together a nature-based economy that places nature and people at its core. And the proposition that I will make is such an economy will actually ensure that prosperity is sustainable and is shared. And by construction is going to be nature positive. So the question is, why are we even talking about this? Well, because when we look at the risk that that humanity is facing, most people think of climate risk, climate change risk, but what many do not realize that we are facing dual risks. It's not only that we are facing climate change risk, but we're also facing the risk of the loss of nature itself and the loss of its biodiversity. As it turns out, both of these risks are linked, and they're linked through human activity, meaning we are the cause of, to a great extent, of the climate change risk that is upon us and the risk of losing the living nature that we need so much and the loss of its biodiversity. As to how we arrived at this calamity or self-inflicted wound, if you like, that's because for a long time, we've been practicing this kind of behavior where we think that economy is somehow outside of nature. In fact, as a professional economist myself, both as a professor and as a professional economist, we practiced the idea that nature is external to the economy, and that's what we talk about externalities. That presumption, which is not really based on reality, gave us the impression that we can extract from nature with impunity and we can pollute with impunity. Notice that the circle of the economy is outside that of nature. It gives you the impression that somehow the economy can grow without needing nature or without even impacting nature. For the longest time, since presumably the Age of Enlightenment, there is a presumption that nature is endowed with infinite commodities, and therefore we can just basically do what we want to do with nature. As we found out that this growth that we enjoyed since the Industrial Revolution is really unsustainable. And what it has done, it has came back to us in terms of the risk of climate change. And because we couldn't deal with and we refused to deal with the climate change risk, it boomeranged back to us in terms of the loss of nature itself and its biodiversity. So we are facing dual risks. But I'd like to think that in every calamity, there's an opportunity for doing something positive. So if this is the current paradigm, but it seems to be the wrong paradigm that we are practicing, what is the right paradigm? Well, it's something actually that we knew a long, long time ago, our ancestors knew, but somehow we forgot somewhere around the 1600s, which is the economy and the culture and everything that we know resides within nature. Nature is not external to us. Nature, in fact, is our home. Everything we do is inside of nature. Our soil, our oxygen, our water, this is the home in which we reside as humans. And everything we do resides within nature itself. In the language of economics, we like to think that that means nature is macro-critical, meaning nature is critical to our lives, to our cultures, to our history, to everything that we do, including our economic life. Question is, so how do we act on this? If this is the correct paradigm, how do we act on it? Well, let's go back to the two calamities I was talking about. In terms of the climate change risk, those that started working on climate change risk, if you think from the Kyoto Protocol through the Paris Accord, identified that in order to reduce the potential of the climate calamity, we need to reduce and/or offset our carbon dioxide emissions. Those that focus on the risk to nature itself and the loss of its biodiversity, the action there is we need to invest in nature. We need to protect nature. We need to allow nature to rejuvenate. So we have two calamities that are happening at the same time. We cannot deal with one and leave the other. We cannot do it sequentially. Question is, how do we reduce the risks of both at the same time? Because we just don't have the time to focus on climate without paying attention to nature and vice versa. Well, it turns out that the science actually gives us the answer. Okay. How does it give us the answer? Well, in the latest IPCC report, they say, well, if we were to invest in nature, if we were to actually allow nature to rejuvenate, nature will boomerang back to us by reducing climate change by at least 38%. So we have a plan of action. It says if we're to invest in nature, and if we're to invest in a living nature, that means we reduce the risk to nature and the loss of its biodiversity. Then, according to the latest IPCC report, it says nature has the capability to reduce carbon dioxide, the stocks of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by at least 38%. So we have a plan of action. We go through nature, we reduce the risk to nature. So that's the first risk. And nature comes back and it helps us to reduce climate change. But notice what I'm saying here. I'm making a proposition about investing in nature. So what I want to propose to you is that what we can do is invest in nature. I'm not talking about philanthropy here or altruistic behavior. I'm talking about, is nature really an investment proposition? Well, let's see. Let's see if it is. Where do we start? Since we're talking about nature and its ability to reduce climate change, what do we know about what nature can do for us? Well, from the science, we know that the open ocean, and that's the ocean that belongs to nobody and therefore belongs to everybody, that open ocean has been grabbing carbon for a very, very long time. And since we've been keeping data since the 1870s till now, we are fairly certain that the open ocean has grabbed over 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide that is sitting at the bottom of that ocean. Okay, what else do we know? Closer to shore, we know that salt marshes, seagrass, mangroves, kelp forests, and so forth, they capture tremendous amount of carbon in their roots and in their sediments. They also do other things. They provide defense against flooding, and they provide for greater fish stocks. For example, when you have healthy seagrass, we have healthy fish stocks and we have healthy coral reefs. What else do we know? We also know from the science that in the oceans, there are these microscopic organisms called phytoplankton. They do something incredible. They grab tremendous amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and they return oxygen to the atmosphere. How much carbon dioxide? They grab about 37 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year. And if you'd like to visualize how much, what does that quantity per year amount to? That's equivalent to the work of 4 Amazon forests per year. Okay, what else do we know? It turns out that it's not only that flora that is grabbing carbon from the atmosphere. So it's not only trees and seagrass and salt marshes and mangroves, but it turns out that also great animals are also helping to grab carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This is work of, if you like, the first paper would be the paper by Andy Pershing of 2010. Turns out that these great whales, the 9 species of the great whales, grab incredible amount of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and they fix it on their body partly, okay? And through the way they like to eat, a lot of them are baleen whales, meaning they have no teeth. Their mouth is like a sieve. They like to eat krill, and the krill likes to feed on phytoplankton. And the phytoplankton, in order to survive, needs phosphorus, nitrogen, and iron. And those 3 ingredients are found in the fecal plumes of these whales. So the whale feeds on the krill feeds on the phytoplankton, and the phytoplankton needs what is in the poop of the whale in order to survive, especially iron. Now, why is that important for us? Because that means the whales are fertilizing the phyto, And by fertilizing the phyto is able to grab more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The whales capture also carbon on their body. And because they are so heavy, these great whales, when they die, they sink. And when they sink below 1,000 meters, that carbon on their body never really comes back to the atmosphere, doesn't become CO2. So it's sequestered at the bottom of the ocean forever. How much on the body of a single great whale? On average, about 9 tons of carbon, or if you like, that's equivalent to 33 tons of carbon dioxide that's being kept out of the atmosphere due to the work of one whale. If you like to visualize that, that's the work of at least 1,500 trees. One whale, 1,500 trees on its body. But then the whale fertilizes the phyto, and that's also helping to capture carbon from the atmosphere, such that the work of a single whale is equivalent to 1,000 of trees in terms of carbon sequestration. So the message here is that it's not only flora, but it's also fauna that is also helping to capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and they are great allies in the fight against climate change. Just to complete the picture for you, the cousins of these whales, the largest animal on land, which is the elephant, also help to sequester carbon. This is the work of Fabio Berzaghi, Nature Journal, 2019. And by the way, he just published one with his colleagues, just came out 2 weeks ago in Nature Journal, again, documenting that elephants and the large herbivores help to sequester carbon in the forests through the way they eat, through the way they forage. They tend to like plants that are low in fiber and therefore high in protein and low in carbon. And what they leave alone are plants that are high in fiber and high in carbon. So what these elephants are doing through the way they walk, through the way they fertilize the forest, they refer to, in fact, as the forest engineers. And they allow large trees to grow bigger and grab more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And what these scientists were able to estimate is that the work of these elephants enhance carbon sequestration in the trees or in the forest between 7 and 14%, depending on the density of the elephant per square kilometer. So as you can see, we're talking about flora and fauna helping to fight climate change by grabbing carbon from the atmosphere. But the question is, well, is there value in carbon capture? Okay, because I'm talking about investing in nature. So the question is, well, is carbon an investment proposition? As it turns out, indeed it is, because what has happened is since the Kyoto Protocol, and especially after the Paris Accord, countries made commitments to go carbon zero, carbon negative, carbon neutral by 2050. Now, that was predicated on actions that they were supposed to have taken at the time of these commitments. But what happened was these countries did not take the action that is needed. And as a result, the need to deal with climate change moved from 2050 to 2040. And again, the world failed to take the right action. And as it is, now we're talking about needing to do something urgently by 2030. We need to go carbon negative, carbon zero. From a market perspective, that means there's an insatiable demand by countries and now by corporations that have made also commitments to go carbon zero or carbon neutral, to grab carbon from the atmosphere, to sequester that carbon, to offset our carbon footprint. That creates the demand for carbon or for technologies or for nature-based solutions that can help grab carbon from the atmosphere. As a result, for anyone that follows the carbon pricing, when I started this work 5 years ago, the price of carbon was $24. Today on the European exchange, the price of a ton of carbon is over $100 per ton. Some companies are paying $600 per ton to a carbon capture machine. So the demand is there. What we need to do here is unleash the supply. And no matter how much supply we have, we'll never be able to satiate what is needed, the demand, because already the scientists have identified that nature can achieve about 40% of what is needed. Okay, So is there value in carbon? Indeed it is. And it's not only about trees, it's about, especially right now, especially after COP26, there's a recognition that the ocean is really the carbon sink, and we should be focusing on the blue economy or blue carbon economy, because that's really what's going to make the fight against climate change meaningful. Now, given that the science is telling us nature is valuable to us, question is, can we value nature services? Okay, meaning if you have an example in front of you here is the elephant. The elephant is grabbing carbon on behalf of humanity. What would be the value of the services of this elephant over her lifetime? Imagine an elephant working on behalf of humanity and grabbing carbon, which is what she's doing just by leading her life. If that elephant could speak, she would say, why don't you pay me a salary? Because I'm working for you. What would that salary be over her lifetime? So that's what we set out to do, a group of us. And what we found out is that the expected discounted present value of the lifetime earnings of a single elephant is over $2.6 million. If you would like to think of it on a flow basis, that's roughly paying the elephant a salary of over $50,000 a year. What else do we know? This is recent work that we have done. We looked at the carbon sequestration service of seagrass globally. Okay, this is work with marine biologist, premier marine biologist, Professor Carlos Duarte. We're able to value the seagrass globally, and it turns out that just in carbon sequestration alone, seagrass globally is worth over $2 trillion. Just imagine. But seagrass also is provides a great defense against flooding, and we can also value that the role of seagrass in defense against flooding, and that would add about $1 trillion. Also, when you have healthy seagrass, scientists have proven that healthy seagrass leads to healthy fish stocks, and we can also add, additional value to the ecosystem services of seagrass. If we were to value the carbon sequestration service of the great whales, what you would end up with about $2 million, actually, that would be a minimum. Just the expected discounted present value of the lifetime earnings of a single whale is at least $2 million, and that's mostly in terms of carbon sequestration. If we go back to the deep ocean where I started, and you say, well, if the deep ocean has grabbed over 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide since we started to keep data, 1870, how much is that worth? That is worth at least $30 trillion. Imagine. Now, what this is telling us is biodiversity, because when we talk about flora and fauna and their interaction of the two, we're really talking about biodiversity. This is telling us that biodiversity is valuable, not valuable only in terms of the intrinsic value of nature and its right to exist, but also in terms of services to humanity, services for which there is market, services that are incredibly valuable to us. Okay, but in order to unleash that potential of nature, the science tells us nature is valuable. We can come around and do a market valuation of the services of nature. Question is, what else do we need in order to be able to meet the demand that I just spoke about, the demand for carbon sequestration? How do we unleash that supply? It turns out that we need a third pillar. So the science and the valuation tells us that we have a potential new wealth. We are all of the countries, in fact, Indonesia itself is sitting on potentially a tremendous amount of wealth in terms of its blue carbon. The question, this is all in potential, but how do you make it a reality? Well, we start with the science, we do the valuation. The third pillar is the legal framework. Okay, let's remind ourselves that when we talk about natural capital, the difference between an asset and a capital is, in order for something to enter the balance sheet of a country or a corporation, it not only has to be an asset, it has to be codified in the law. The law has to allow you, whatever that law may be, to allow you to move that asset and put it on the balance sheet of the country, in this case, if it's a blue economy. So it's very important to ascertain who owns the asset, who can speak on behalf of that asset, who can write the contract on behalf of that asset. Once you have these three pillars, really, we're off to the markets. So when somebody asks me, well, what does it take for us to unleash the potential of our blue economy? I said, let's start. That means on the supply side here, the first thing to do is to do a scientific equation, because you need to know what is the benchmark. What is it that, what is the value of what we have? And here I'm talking about market valuation. Market valuation. Third thing is we need to ascertain who can speak on behalf of this asset. Is the asset owned in a natural asset? Is it owned by the government, or is it owned by private parties? Okay. Once we have these three pillars, then you can go to the demand side here. Suddenly, because once you do the legal framing, then the asset becomes a capital. It enters the balance sheet of the country. If the government is the owner of the natural asset, in this case, the blue carbon asset. Once it enters the balance sheet, then the markets say, okay, that's a new class of assets. We can insure it. We can do all kinds of, we can sell its services. We can create all kinds of instruments and businesses around it. But whatever we do, since we're talking about nature, and we're talking about building an economy around a living nature, not a dead nature, there are two principles that have to guide our work, which is whatever revenue is generated from the sale, in this case, let's say the carbon of the trees or carbon of the mangroves or salt marshes or seagrass, this is the middle column here, excuse me, has to come back to look after the assets in perpetuity, meaning in this case, nature, and has to come back to look after the stewards of nature in perpetuity. That would be the local indigenous population. I wanted to give you an example of a country that we have a potential project with, and that's a proposition that we made to Gabon, to the Minister of the Environment of Gabon, Professor Lee White. But there we were focusing on the elephants, just to show you what one can do. The elephants, as I said, are helping to sequester carbon in the forests. And Gabon has, when we did the study, Gabon had 57,000 elephants. And those elephants, if you maintain the density of elephant to the land that they have between 0.5 to 1 per square kilometer, those elephants can grow to about 190,000 elephants. What can we do? Well, we can sell the carbon services of the elephants. And here I want to underscore something very important. We are never for selling the asset itself, meaning you never sell the elephant. You are selling its services. It's almost like paying the elephants a salary for their work. If we were to go to the market and sell the carbon services of the elephants, okay, the stock itself of 57,000 elephants themselves, the value of those elephants just in carbon sequestration is $12 billion. Imagine. And then what you can do is you allow the elephants to grow back to what they used to be, which is about 190,000, and you would be adding another $20 billion in terms of flow, such that Gabon, basically the value of the elephant carbon, just not the elephant, just the carbon sequestration service of the elephants is about $33 billion. Just imagine. And the income that Gabon would get from the sale of the carbon of the elephants is about $950 million a year. Okay. Now, if you ask me, how would you do something like that? Well, this is the proposition. On the left-hand side here, you've got the buyers of the carbon. Who would those be? Well, these are all the companies that have in the world that have made the commitments to go carbon zero, carbon negative, carbon neutral. It could be households. It could be financial companies that want to reduce their footprint. What they're willing to do, they're willing to pay money, okay, in order to get these, for example, whether it's the whale in this case, or the mangroves or the elephants, these are keystone species or blue carbon species or blue carbon flora that will reduce the carbon, grab the carbon that these buyers of carbon need. And in return, that money would go to look after these assets in perpetuity. In this case, if it's the mangroves, the mangroves would have to be looked after in perpetuity because only a living mangrove can grab carbon. And of course, because you're looking after the natural world, you're looking after the stewards of the assets, and that would be the local communities, indigenous population. We can put all of that on a blockchain technology because it's incredibly important for these markets that everything be transparent and be verifiable and be traceable, because that's the only way to create trust, because the money would maybe flowing from sort of these rich companies, or if you like, from the global north, could be flowing to the global south or to different parts of the world. And there's an issue of information. And blockchain would ensure that there's no double counting, that everybody knows who is contracting with whom, what has been bought, and who received what. Now, if we're to do so, I claim that we're going to end up with what I call is the win-win model. Because notice who's going to benefit from this new economy that is nature-based, based on a regenerative nature. Well, first of all, the first, from a government point of view, the sellers, because the government, if the government owns the blue economy, then they're going to benefit from selling the carbon or the biodiversity credits. First of all, they're going to see the revenue increase. All that money is going to come on their balance sheet. That means their net worth would change. That means their debt sustainability would change. That means the ratings for the government would change. You would be diversifying the economy because nature assets are acyclical. They don't follow a business cycle. They have nothing to do with, God forbid, there's another COVID pandemic and tourists don't come. It doesn't really matter because you are selling carbon, and carbon is needed in order to fight climate change or biodiversity metrics. So it will improve the fiscal stance of the government. It would diversify the economy. And as a result, it will enhance growth. Who else benefits from this economy? Well, whoever is buying. So if, let's say, for example, Microsoft is buying the blue carbon in Indonesia, from Indonesia, what would Microsoft get? Not only would they get the carbon credits, because they're buying carbon credits, which they can use to offset their carbon emissions, or they can use it to benefit from the upside because the price of carbon keeps going up, but they also would enhance their ESG scores. And because that money is coming in to look after nature and to look after people, creating employment, keeping people in their land, they can attach all of that funding, all of that money that they're spending to the SDGs 1, 3, 5, 8, 10, 13, 14, 15. And Microsoft will be able to put it on their website and say, look, what a great company we are. Not only are we offsetting our carbon footprint, but we are actually enhancing resilience of nature. Who else would win from this? Obviously, the local communities where nature resides, because when we create resilience in nature, we stabilize people in their land, we create jobs, we alleviate poverty, we create sustainable wealth. And of course, when nature is thriving, that means it has a positive knock-on effect on health and the well-being of people. And who else wins? Well, nature itself, because the way this model is structured, this new paradigm, this nature basis, you only can get benefit if nature is alive and well and thriving. So we end up with 4 wins: the seller, the buyer, the local community, and nature. There are no losers in this new paradigm that is nature and people positive. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob Chemi. Your presentation is quite interesting. I think already 6 participants raised hand. they want to ask lots of things from you, but however, I would like to go through to the second speaker, to Mr. Jonathan Turner, please.
Well, I will use slides. Perfect. Lovely. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if Dr. Shami is staying with us or not. I know he's very, very welcome to. And if there's questions for him, I'm happy to read through those and answer any that that I can and pass back. Is the microphone on? Yeah. Come closer. The gain. Okay. Okay. Is that better? Thank you. So I was saying, if are there any questions for Ralph? We can take them offline and revert if he's still with us. And I want to elaborate a little bit on. Oh, hello, Ralph. I can see you there on the screen now. We can elaborate on this now a little bit. First of all, some introductions. I and Andy are from NLA International, and we work extremely closely with Special Envoy Nico Brito of the Seychelles, Special Envoy to ASEAN, and we're delighted to be here today. It's really very kind of you to invite us to share our perspectives on blue economy with you, and I'm grateful for Ralph joining us from the US. Is that better? Thank you. That's better. I'm also humbled really to be here. There's a great number of people have joined online. I think there's over 400 people now joining online, as well as the people here in the room. And though we're sharing a perspective, Ralph, Andy, and myself sharing a perspective on blue economy, blue carbon, and blue bonds, you will all have a perspective on the space of blue economy and the innovations that are happening within it. So we're here to share our perspective, but very grateful for the opportunity to hear yours as well. I'd like to speak a little bit more about blue bonds specifically, and maybe picking up on some of the threads from Ralph's presentation earlier. And then in a little while, Andy will be talking about marine protected area management specifically. So we're sort of going on a journey here from the macro to the relatively micro, talking about the global market and the global services of nature, to how to turn that into a financial instrument that you can use to raise funds, to drive activity, and then through to the specifics of running a marine protected area. And during the visit we have to Indonesia this week, we'll be out to East Kalimantan and seeing some of the marine protected area spaces that you have designated as important spaces to preserve. So this slide here, the highest level, courtesy of Asian Development Bank, and I will give the sources for all of the images and references that we make through the slide pack. We'll share the slide pack, so you're welcome to photograph them, but we'll also be making them available to share. This image, as I say, is sourced from the Blue Bond Start Guide from the Asian Development Bank. And it's quite a nice articulation of how blue bonds work at the very highest level. So blue bonds are nothing really more complicated than a financial product that following in the footsteps of green bonds, which we've seen a significant rise in, and we'll talk about that in a little while, and climate bonds. They're being issued by banks and nations and are specifically focused on sustainable ocean-themed investment, sustainable fishing, ecotourism, waste management. Maybe go back a few slides. We've gone quite quick there. Thank you. Essentially, they're activities that generate revenue. And so Ralph's posed an interesting question by suggesting that MPAs themselves, marine protected areas, mangrove may be a source of revenue. So there's an interesting angle that we might be able to dovetail here. But going into the diagram, in effect, what you've got is a government here setting up a bond, a blue bond. They're raising capital from investors. The government then has a mechanism for dispersing that funding into blue projects. And then ocean benefits are being delivered for the local communities and for the environment. So that could be the way in which a marine protected area is being managed and governed, and the activities that are permitted within it, ecotourism and so forth, as revenue generating activities. That revenue then flows back to government, and government can then use that to repay the capital to the investor along with the interest. So we're talking about a particular model of financial instrument here. So they're effectively, the bonds are a way of borrowing money to grow and develop an existing activity, but also to kickstart new activities. So who's doing these things? If we go to the next slide with a sort of world map on it, they're relatively new blue bonds. The first sovereign blue bond was issued by the Seychelles, and we heard this morning from your chair that the former president of the Seychelles had been here to deliver a talk under this program of training. I believe that was probably most likely to be President James Michel, with whom we have a good and a very strong working relationship. Indeed, we're doing a little bit of work in the Seychelles at the minute on marine protected areas. But since 2016, when that first blue bond was issued, various other bonds of different sizes have been issued. The Bahamas have a policy-based guarantee and a blue bond looking after 170 mile long coral reef and a marine protected area. They issued a bond of $200 million US. Belize Belize has got the large coral reef. Bahamas have done one. Belize have done one, which was a huge debt for nature swap following in the footprints of Seychelles, but of a substantial size of $364 million. Cabo Verde at the other end of the scale and West Africa have issued bonds currently worth about $2.5 million with a possibility of extending by another $1 million. And there's a Nordic investment bond, Baltic blue bond that's been issued, and I'll send links and references to all of these so you can read about them in detail. That's about $190 million up in the north of Europe there. The Bank of China have issued blue bond with a value equivalent to over $900 million US. Asian Development Bank have done a dual tranche one in Australia and New Zealand that's worth $300 million. So we're starting to talk about large numbers, or seemingly large numbers, multiple and hundreds of millions. But no doubt more will follow. And I think the blue bond growth is likely to expand. And I think maybe when you look at the ratio of land mass to sea space, we talk about the biosphere of Earth being sort of 95% plus of the livable space on Earth, the habitable space that supports life is the oceans. Well, green bonds, as I'll show you in a second, are of a substantial global value, but only represent really activity on land. And the sea is vastly more area and volume than the land. So if we look at the trends and the patterns that we've seen in green bonds, maybe they're indicative of the way in which blue bonds could develop and grow. In 2007, the first green bond was issued. So remember that the Seychelles' first sovereign bond was 2016. green bonds started a little while before, and perhaps a source of inspiration for the other mechanisms. That might be louder than you want it to be. That's I'll move it away a little bit. Is that better? A bit closer. A bit like Mick Jagger now, sort of using them. Good use of the mic. Sideways, yeah. Don't worry, I'm not dancing. So in 2007, the first green bond opened, and it was, relatively modest amount, perhaps a couple of million US dollars. But by 2014, we're starting to look at bonds being issued around climate and from the UK. 2015, the global market's growing again, 100 million and $100 billion rather, and just really racing to the 2020 line, where this point of data comes from, which was a trillion US dollars by the end of 2020 was the green bond market. And it continues to grow. We continue to see growth in that space. And that growth looks like this. And the next slide, we see the graph. That's really is a staggering exponential level of growth. This comes from a source of the Climate Bond Initiative. And no doubt they'll start tracking blue bonds in a similar way to they've tracked green. Just next slide, please, just for the chart. Oh, it has. Thank you. And the next slide, I want to talk to you about the parallels that I think we might be able to transpose the learning of, and perhaps in doing so, there we go, perfect, accelerate the way in which we, as a community of blue economy practitioners, can embrace blue bonds as a model, because the learning's already been done. Green bonds have been established, and we've seen the pattern. We have experts, the likes of Ralph, who understand the financial markets in a great depth and understand the opportunity of nature-based solutions and how to turn something that really is of value, water and food and air, things that really have an intrinsic value to humanity, to have a financial value that complements that. And we start to recognize the value of those nature-based solutions. So the fact that green bonds came first is really useful. The finance markets have started to mature approaches around principles for green bonds that are now being transposed into blue bonds. I know Ralph was at this. I couldn't make it, but at the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon in Portugal last year, Susan Johnson, the senior advisor to the UN Global Compact Sustainable Ocean Business, made the observation that the International Capital Markets Association, the ICMA, published the standards underpinning the global sustainable bond market in 2021. So a couple of years ago now, just over a year ago, 98% of all sustainable bonds issued internationally were aligned to those principles that were published, those standards, those ICMA standards. So it makes sense that ICMA, along with UN Global Compact, International Finance Corporation, and the Asian Development Bank, and the UN Environmental Programme, their Sustainable Finance Initiative, announced that they will soon be publishing a good practitioner's guide on how to use sustainable bonds to provide and access financing for blue economy projects and strategies in a credible way. And if you go through and compare the guidance that's already published and that's emerging, and these are the front covers of some of the documents that are out there now, you'll see that there's some really strong themes and alignments across the recommendations. And Ralph's already alluded to some in his sharing earlier. But terms such as robust ocean governance systems and true commitment drive those considering blue bonds to have in place the right policy commitments and mechanisms to demonstrate that strategic intent. And this comes through in all of these documents really quite strongly. And as I say, Ralph's mentioned it too. You have that framework in place, have that governance framework in place, demonstrate that, in paper, in policy, that this is the intention. Terms like the use of proceeds, you'll see use of funds, you'll see green bond frameworks, you'll see sustainable economic activities, and you'll see reference to processes for project evaluation. All of those sorts of themes about what are you going to spend the money on? Where's it going to go? Is it going on the right things? Is it going back, as Ralph was advocating, in perpetuity to maintain the asset? And it's a really important takeaway point that Ralph said, This is not about making money by disposing of your asset. You're not selling nature. What you're doing is a different economic paradigm. You're doing is leveraging the yield of the asset of nature. So you always own the asset. That can be capital. That can be an asset sat on a nation's balance sheet. And the income is the yield from that. So that pays, that's the elephant paying the 50,000 a year rather than selling the elephant for 2 million. So it's a long-term in perpetuity, maintaining and improving biodiversity. Therefore, your asset value goes up and your yield goes up. But it's not a quick cash win. So how do you get those projects? How do you design them and make sure that they are being placed well? It's really interesting that ADB specifically drill down on this next point, which is that they make reference to there being real clarity on the volume and value of the right kind of projects. And in their document, you'll see that they talk about blue bonds being of a significant value, sort of 50 million to 500 million, but they're recommending project values of in excess of that value. So you're sort of looking at 1 to 1.5 billion to be able to sustain a 500 million bond. So that ability to understand the value of the projects that you're putting into the pot that will be funded and the revenue that those projects can deliver you are the underpinning value that makes the bond useful and valuable on the capital market so you can actually trade with it. So that's really important from an investor confidence perspective. And the fourth of the big themes that really fall out of these is the external verification, the external review. And that's mentioned across almost every document in one form or another. And you'll see that. And again, Ralph suggested it's that finance markets want transparency. They want assurance and transparency. They want to know that the activities that are happening are ESG compliant, the ESG funds. And Andy and I, was it yesterday or the day before? I can't remember now. We were in Kuala Lumpur, wasn't it? And at an investor forum, and we were hearing investors talking about the need to for funds to have confidence in funds, to have confidence that money was being well spent in projects that were giving environmental, social governance positive impacts. And a statistic was quoted to us that 20% of the global funds from pensions were now being obliged to fall into ESG funds. And if you got your blue bond structure right, there could be a connection. So pension schemes starting to invest into blue bonds because of the level of transparency that's in place, supporting environmental, social governance projects. So as I say, I'll provide links to all of those things. I want to just bring a few live examples. I want to give some reassurance. It is a relatively new space. We're talking about blue bonds starting in 2016. So it's less than 10 years old since this mechanism of finance instrument was being deployed and being used. I mentioned earlier on Belize specifically, and I highlighted some of the words that Rear Admiral Elton Bennett, who is the commandant of Belize Coast Guard, used. So without reading all of that, I just want to pick out the key highlighted words. In terms of the Coast Guard, aligning our strategy with the national strategy. So there's a clear national strategy, a clear policy mandate that we're going to do blue bonds. They raised 364 million. And now the relevant departments align to that very clearly, that very clear mission. It requires government to do some reorganizing, and he's taken that as a government department to reorganize his specific patrols and the way he manages the marine protected area. So he can demonstrate firsthand through his specific actions as a frontline operator of a department within Belize's governance structure that he is living up to the mandate of the blue bond. So it's a real clear traceability. And the other thing that was really interesting, and we noted that arriving today, that there are representatives from different functions and departments in Indonesia's government here. He made the point of working well with the Ministry of Blue Economy, but also with the Fisheries Department. So he's talking about that ability to go cross-government. So it's really, it struck me as soon as we were introduced to people this morning on arrival that you're there. This is a cross-government activity, and the recognition of that's really very positive. So I know it's a relatively small example, but that technical end, that delivery end, aligning that straight line from national intent through to practical activity on the ground or on the water space. There's a clear alignment. Another thing that was really important was the way in which funds were being dispersed. And I bring a couple of examples here. The Belize Fund for Sustainable Future was formally incorporated as recently as March 2022. So not even a year old. So again, reassuring to know that the world is on a learning journey about how to do this. And with an exclusive economic zone of in excess of 6 million square kilometers, there's every reason that Indonesia could quickly become a lead position to share learning with the world. But this is a dispersal fund that was set up. So after that 364 million blue bond was established, they needed a mechanism, an independent mechanism to disperse that. And it's a great website to visit. The Belize Fund for Sustainable Future has much information on it. It's a very useful resource. I'm going to take you to another one which we've been working with. I met when I was last in the Seychelles, the SECAT, which is the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust. Again, a really clear, independently governed network of people, or a trust that's run by a network of people with a very clear mandate for the dispersal of those blue bond funds. And I'm highlighting these to you because I think they're really good examples. They really are, good practice, if not best practice, as to how this can be done. Belize has won awards. SECAT was very pioneering in the way it did it in the Seychelles. And I think there are models there that you could replicate in Indonesia to demonstrate your ability to disperse of funds in a fair and just and transparent way when and if you set up a blue bond. So these mechanisms do exist, and there is good practice that can be replicated. So I'm going to leave you with some thoughts. And the next slide is a map you'll probably recognize. So you have a big opportunity. It's a big challenge. It's a large space, 6.15 million square kilometers of sea space is a big area to look after. But as Ralph said, that those challenges are also opportunities. And 6.1 million square kilometers of sea space, I think, puts you as something like the third or fourth largest exclusive economic zone in the world. So what does that roadmap look like for Indonesia to develop a blue bond based solution? How can you take the practices that exist out there in the world of green bonds and the emerging thinking on blue bonds and the good practices from other countries that have succeeded? And how can you really pick the strongest examples, the best examples, and learn from them and evolve them, and then share your learning back and make the world a stronger place of knowledge for how to use these financial instruments for good? What are the projects? And keep in mind the learning from Ralph regarding blue carbon income and revenue from that source, but also think about things like waste processing solutions. Can you list projects that prevent damage to the oceans and create revenue from waste processing to support viable projects to identify the value and volume that ADB look for in blue bonds? But which agencies need to be engaged? Which will align to embrace change and align to emerging national strategies and demonstrate the right governance? What changes need to happen? There's big questions, but things that other countries have tackled successfully. And how will you do transparent management? How will you demonstrate to support blue bond governance? Or what sort of audit and ESG compliance can you demonstrate? And how do you overcome those challenges? They are big questions. They're things that are surmountable. People have done this. And I'd be very happy to share more learning and to and more innovation, and to make more connections for you with people who are succeeding in this space. I'm delighted to work with you to develop these roadmaps and develop this thinking. These slides will be shared. There are links throughout, and there's links on the last slide here of useful resources. So again, all these links are available for you to take and digest in slow time, and we're glad to take questions and to discuss at length a topic that we're very passionate about. So thank you very much from me. Ralph, are you still there?
Ralph, are you on?
Yeah. Okay. No problem, Ralph. Yeah, there's a number of questions on the Q&A. What format would you like to follow for the Q&A? Should we do it after Andy's presentation?
Yes.
Would that work better?
Andy first, yeah.
Okay, let's do that.
So you can focus to Q&A.
All right. And then, so it's, will you introduce Andy? Or shall I introduce him? No.
Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Bapak Ibu sekalian,
Exactly. Thank you.
saya akan perkenalkan untuk pembicara yang ketiga ini adalah Mr. Andrew Hamflett, also from the UK Blue Economy Solution NLA Company. Akan berbicara fokus tentang topik marine protected areas.
Thank you very much.
Yours, Andrew.
Thank you very much indeed. What a thrill to be here. A couple of quick opening reflections. Was very, very fortunate to bring the family here last August. We went to Komodo Island and we went snorkeling and saw the beauty of your country and particularly your waters. And we went snorkeling off Komodo and spent a magical half hour following up above a manta ray below us. Beautiful, enormous, graceful. So I've fallen in love with your waters. And because of that, I've decided that I am the completely self-appointed and entirely unofficial, that's very important, Blue Economy Ambassador for Indonesia now. And I hope I step up to that role from here on in. Excellent. So we've talked about how there is value in carbon credits. We've talked about how the financial mechanisms are coming into place to channel that money into new areas. And I'm just going to do a headline overview of what I know this nation wants to do, which is to channel that into environmental protection. The vast majority of it I understand. And one of those elements is marine protected areas. So we're just going to give our reflections on where we think that world is and what might be of interest. So I'm going to cover three things, just an overview of where things are. And then a couple of issues in MPA management. So looking across what everyone's doing around the world and where the commentary is, what are the key issues that are emerging that everyone's scratching their head on and trying to address in the way forward, and a couple of innovations, because we are obviously partnering here with the BRIN as well, and everyone gets excited about those. So if we can go to Seascape, the global view. So Indonesia is part of a global drive to invest in marine protected areas. As we stand here today, very pleased to report that the 5th International Marine Protected Areas Congress is taking place in Canada. And I think that's a reflection of how this is rising up the agenda. You are passionate advocates of this, but it is beginning to burgeon. The MPA world itself started, the idea, the notion started in the 1960s. By the 1980s, we had a handful of marine protected areas. And in the last 2 or 3 decades, we've actually started to see it rise up the agenda. And I'll give some examples of why that's happening. But also that coalition of 50 plus nations are coming together to support the stated aim to protect 30% of the global ocean by 2030, which is not far away. Again, all the links to these will be in the presentation that comes out. We're currently estimated globally to be about 7.65% coverage. So long way to go, but we do get the sense that things are starting to move in the right direction. Okay. These statistics are challengeable, but one environmental organization called MPA Atlas is trying to track where all these things are globally. And they've got 4 categories of how protected a marine protected area is, and they're trying to rank that to keep a track of it and to try and drive energy into this. So Indonesia, I read a report recently, has 284,000 square km of marine area under protection currently. Obviously wants to do more. We're so impressed with their ambitions. That's roughly 2/3 already of its target of protecting 10% of its waters. Do tell me if I'm wrong. Within that list, I think in a lot of the people we talk to, they're saying there's a long way to go, but we think Indonesia is doing well. You're ranked 47 out of 156 nations with the percentage of its MPAs that are judged to be fully or highly protected. So real top end, you're gripping this. It's not just about telling the world you're doing it. You're actually doing all the hard yards, and we're really looking forward to hearing what you're doing on that to actually make them fully or highly protected. So you're in the top third of the world already, with more energy to come to take you into the next area. So the next one. So across that, I'm just going to see what we see as the key issues that are emerging, the themes that everyone's scratching their head on. One really important point to say, as I've just said before, repeated, it's all new. It's all fairly new. So we're talking about earlier on the blue bonds and the credits are new, but actually the whole issue of MPAs is relatively new in centuries old understanding of the marine space, you know? So it's a new concept, but we do have that feeling that the urge is coming. A couple of examples there. Ivory Coast announced their first marine protected area 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago in 2020. Argentina, just last December, a couple of months ago, they created a new marine protected area right down in the south in Tierra del Fuego. And that comprises 1.2 million acres of land and ocean. So big numbers are flying around. There's energy there, but let's not forget that everyone's learning this together and it's fairly new. Secondly, as partly aligned to that people aren't resting on their laurels. Progress is being made. There's now a target to reach 30% globally by 2030. So we're starting to see more and more space being allocated as marine protected areas to try and ensure that the environmental ecosystems are protected within that. And they're getting bigger. This comes with its own issues about how you manage that, but they are getting bigger. So the political will is there and the drive is there and people are understanding the science. So a couple of examples here for you. That one in Guatemala, they just recently announced 8 new marine protected areas, and that will come to around 18,000 square kilometers in total, which is 13% of their waters. So they're driving by going hard and going, say, right, we mean this, let's really make it happen and let's drive up the percentage. Driven by science, needs to be protected. And we'll talk about some of the benefits of those in a minute. Similarly, in Peru, I think it's called the Nazca Dorsal National Reserve, is the first 100% marine protected area in Peru. And that takes their coverage of MPAs to 8%. So the argument has been won. I know speak to marine biologists around the world, and half of your job is to educate and inform and champion and advocate and move there. We are getting the sense that the argument, particularly for marine protected areas, has won. It's now about doing more, doing better, and embedding. But encouraging stuff, bigger equals better. To take a slightly sideways view on that, and I think this is where the course of history, as former President Obama said, takes a zigzag approach. Never underestimate the effort it takes to get a marine protected area designated. It's cross-government, it takes leadership, all the regulatory issues need to go through the stakeholder engagement. It's very, very difficult. So you just get over the line and you get there and you take your breath, and then people start to say, well, how is that protected? And how are you actually going to have the resource and the skills and the equipment to make sure that it is properly protected and you're monitoring it, etc. So there is some heat in the world around the fact that marine protected areas, they call them paper parks, in that it's just there in name only. A couple of examples here, and this is a global issue, but there's a couple of interesting things I'd like to pick out that says it's progressing slightly. So the European Court of Auditors a couple of years ago had warned that they, in their sort of challenging role, the EU was failing to protect its marine biodiversity. They concluded that there wasn't much meaningful signs of progress, despite being the most overfished sea in the world, which is the Mediterranean. And they suggested, this is the European Environment Agency, so a group of environmental auditors, that fewer than 1% of European MPAs were fully protected by fishing bans and other restrictive practices. So EU is a big body, got lots of infrastructure in terms of governance, but they've got over the line to do it. But there is a challenge for them and for everyone to say, how do we make this real in terms of it being the protected part of the area? So challenge to come there. Similarly in Australia, again, the difference between fully protected, no take zones, and then grayer or light blue areas maybe that are partial takes, that people are just beginning to understand what the differences are. And in Australia, it obviously depends what kind of activities are allowed. Recent research shows that partially protected areas don't contribute a huge amount to wildlife conservation, but interestingly, in the sort of strategic area, can take resources away from fully protected areas. So there's a debate going on around, with finite resource, how do you allocate it to get the best return? And our argument would be get more resource. And we're looking at the financial ways to do that. Don't cut back from the ones that have been established, but let's get more in. The science shows this is good. So this is a global issue. The paper parks, we've done really well to get them allocated. What do we do to make sure they actually live up to the name of protection? Similarly, two more examples just to show that this is a global thing. And this is in England. So we're no better than anyone else in terms of the challenges we face. So a freedom of information request from one of the political parties showed that between January 2015 and September 2020, the UK's Marine Management Organisation, the government body responsible for its waters, suspended one fishing licence for a year and two for 2 months apiece. So again, we have a lot of talk around marine monitoring and marine protection. There's not a lot of outputs in terms of catching people doing things, and we know it's going on. Everyone knows it's going on. Greenpeace and others show that's it. So everyone's facing the same issue. We've done well to get there. How do we actually enforce and monitor? Excellent. So that's that. That's one of the big ones. Everyone's shaking their head, and we'll talk about some innovations that are starting to come into play that will help people manage these massive sea spaces, which we understand the value of and we're trying to protect. Another one is the stakeholder issues. A couple of examples here. So the sea belongs to everyone, as Ralph said earlier on, but some rely on it more than others, particularly fisherfolk. And obviously there's a scale of fisherfolk, from artisanal local fishers doing it to put the food on the plate, up to local market distributors, up to really large international chains. So, for example, in the USA, this is interesting in another level of governance and regulation and who does own it. A really large MPA was for a while the largest in the world, off Hawaii, took severe crosshair shooting from the local communities on where they said that longline fishers would be forced out of that area and would face increased competition with foreign vessels. They'd have lower catch rates and higher operating costs. So while the environmental opportunities there's also human impacts of involving this and involving this new model of doing it. There was also, though, to counter that, a recent study by an academic, a marine resource economist at the University of Hawaii locally, who sort of lifted the lid and had a little look. And they're suggesting that those impacts were overstated, and actually it forced them to try new ways of working and innovate themselves, so much so that the fishers' catch per unit effort, they're aligned to profitability, stayed steady. But we're going to have this dialogue, particularly with fisheries, particularly with tourism and other coastal development areas, that if you're hiving off areas that they've relied on for decades and centuries, what does that mean? And that's where really deep, sensitive, integrated stakeholder engagement from the start is going to be really important, because you need to take everyone along. You can't please all of the people all the time. You can explain what you're trying to do with them, and so that they can understand. And in Indonesia, a good way of example of actually saying what's happening, you'll know that the 5 new MPAs around the western island of Baru, where fishing activity would be limited to traditional fishers only using sustainable gear. So there are ranges of ways. We've said there might be challenges around partial take, but if you're trying to restrict it in a way where you're understanding that it will be low take areas rather than large commercial vessels coming into those waters, you might be able to protect the sustainability, and you would hope actually drive abundance back into fish stocks, which means the local community can benefit at the same time as the environmental ecosystems flourishing and growing and strengthening. So there's a range of options available to administrators and governance and government people to try and work out what's best to protect the environment, to protect the local communities, and to show leadership. Interesting that stakeholder line. Slightly aligned, also around the ongoing benefits, that it's not just about coral, reef, dolphins, fish, all that kind of stuff. Again, with the sea as a shared resource, particularly in island states such as yourselves, and smaller, or what we call large ocean states, that 2% land, 98% water. Marine and marine ecotourism is hugely important to coastal communities. And this is where lots of interesting things are happening with MPA cross-alignment. And the conference Jonathan and I were talking at yesterday, we led a couple of days ago, was actually talking about 3 words I've heard a lot over this morning already: marine spatial planning, and how can many activities exist alongside each other and integrate in a way that everyone benefits. And there's an understanding that the resource is kept here, but let's strengthen it here. Come on, everyone needs to have an ownership of this so that they can protect it and benefit from it. And this World Bank report, I think it came out maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, shows that for every dollar governments invest in protected areas and support for nature-based tourism, the economic rate of return is at least 6 times. So for communities around the world still suffering from the impacts of COVID, so a lot of government money had to be shelved, had to be channeled in other ways that could have been gone for marine conservation. We're getting the understanding that economic investment, rather than new models, standard economic investment in marine ecotourism and other areas, when managed well, is worth it because everyone benefits. There's a financial return, and that economic return is also balanced alongside environmental gains. So those numbers are supremely helpful to make the case that you're not, this isn't grant money, this is investing in your marine estate so that everyone benefits, including the citizens, and in some people's eyes, the voters. Let's not forget that. So that's an interesting one there. And also, again, the academic world is also trying to look at the Indonesian island mentioned there, and the Gillies, also trying to just keep embedding the importance of human development alongside environmental development, particularly around ecotourism. Important stuff. So again, just to pick that apart again, cannot overstate the importance of stakeholder engagement in all of this. Sea is a shared space. You've got to take people along with you. Not just to talk about establishing MPAs, not just to understand the impacts of investment or of tailoring the sea space in new ways, but to bring people along to be co-owners and co-fosterers of that space. So co-management, co-ownership, there's lots of that happening around the world, from local level to communities going out in boats, really inspiring examples in this part of the world, in the Philippines, where communities are self-organizing around marine protected areas and volunteering their time to go out at night and borrowing lights so they can track down and really protect the shared resource, because they understand what they benefit from it as well, and working with government to own and manage that resource. And that's mainly possible if you have that conversation and engage and open up and say this is a shared resource and it's not, doesn't belong to government to manage entirely. How can we do this together? This island has been here a long, long time. We wanted to be here again. So really interesting in terms of stakeholder. It's not just surveying people and asking them what they think. It's trying to build strong community relations so that you can co-manage issues together. And then I did want to talk a little bit around financing as well. JT did a really good overview of a new model that's there, but it's also encouraging, I think, about other models which are there. And again, people need to understand that there is financing happening at all. So everyone knows that the key issue I said earlier on, it's about channeling resource into them, and people are trying to put infrastructure in that left-hand side example there is an environmental NGO And they have identified that there's a 700 million euro gap per year in the financing gap of what's really needed to ensure marine protected areas can flourish and live in the Mediterranean alone. So rather than just saying that's going to be tricky, they know, and a lot of the things we're saying is there is money out there. There are people on the ground who want to do this, and in government, how do they connect? So people are starting to produce guides to the available resource and finance for marine protected areas and try and guide people and make those connections so the money that's available flows into the right place. We need more of that and in more parts of the world, those kind of resources available to practitioners. And I'd say, well, there is that significant gap, not denying that. We do get a sign, and a lot of commentators are saying we should be optimistic about the future of MPA finance, as it says there. Currently, for example, there are these new models called conservation trust funds, where monies are being challenged, and the stat that came out, 45% of 108 of them that exist around the world, so nearly half of this new model that is developing, and they have provided funding for MPA management. And around 26% of those who have provided it have funded the creation of new MPAs. So there are coalitions coming together, working out how to channel the money in, and there are people on the ground coming up with the ideas and the management plans and the 3-year Gantt charts, all the fun stuff that we have to do when we're finding funding. So it is, I feel, coming together, and I agree that we should be optimistic that the stars are all beginning to align. And another level across from that, I hope we're going to rejig the order a little bit and talk a bit more about blue economy itself in the afternoon session or a bit later. But the key large development banks are now really beginning to engage with the blue economy as a whole. And why that's important for MPAs, because I think that is pushing the whole ocean agenda up the rank with these banks. You have ProBlue, which is the World Bank fund for oceans. Their current oceans portfolio exceeds $7 billion, and we know is going to increase. They're trying to bring other development back money into that. They're also trying to put structures around it. And what we know is that marine protected areas and marine spatial planning and the environmental part is at the heart of that blue economy agenda. There is an issue of blue washing, where people have said, everyone's talking about blue economy. Let's call ourselves that. Do the same thing that you've done all your life and just call it blue, and then someone will give us some money. The strategic inputs from World Bank, Asian Development Bank, other banks in this part of the world, and we've worked with them on this, and the consultants are really fighting to say, unless you have environmental protections at the heart of this, you're wasting your money, because it will go, and all the communities and all the industries that rely on this will be exactly where we are in 20 years' time. So at the heart of that, marine protected areas are in, I think, an escalator that's going up slowly in the heart of those conversations. And the same with the Asian Development Bank. Again, we're working closely with them. They've committed $5 billion to 2024 and are talking about ways to move beyond that funding being there, but as ever, getting it to the right place with the right impact and the right returns. So beyond the blue bonds, these stars are aligning where ocean issues are rising up. We'd rather this had happened 10 years ago, but let's take what we've got and use it the best way. So I'm going to swerve a little bit. Those key issues we've covered so far, we're all really new, so it's early days, so no one should be worried that they're behind. Everyone's learning on this together. There is a community coming together, which is great. Lots still more to do to actually make them fully enforceable and not just paper parks. Stakeholder involvement, both in setting out them and then co-owning and co-managing and preserving themselves, is really important. But the funding is coming. Also, if that funding comes, as well as innovation in the financing mechanisms, this will hopefully hook a line onto the technological and other emerging innovations, which we see, and I'm hoping, again, we'll be able to talk about this in more detail later on, are emerging to really scale up and revolutionize what can be achieved with tools in the area. I've got a couple of examples. So I think that's that clarion call is from the chief executive of Nature Seychelles. It's about innovation, and he was making these comments a couple of years ago as everyone was still reeling from the shock of COVID. And as we said, we were doing quite a lot of work in fisheries and blue economy in the Philippines at the time. And where we were talking about, okay, we're trying to protect fisheries management procedures. It was really got to the point, this is currently on a country that imports a lot of stuff, getting food on the table and keeping people healthy and food security. So huge swathes of government funding went into areas where they might have gone into other more forward-thinking things. Quite right to do that because people needed it. The other thing, and the point that Mr. Shah was trying to make here, is that the oft-quoted phrase, necessity is the mother of invention. If there's less money, the problems are still there. How do we use it better? And that's real good burning deck to drive innovation. We've got to do it. Our passion isn't dimming. We're not going to go away. So let's try and engage in other ways. And he's talking about social marketers, tech companies, just open that door up and say, here's our problem. You have skills we don't have. How can we work together and move it all forward? So we will talk a bit later on technological innovations, and particularly in monitoring. But innovation for us doesn't mean that. It's about doing things in a new systems way. And so, for example, some of the thinking here, animals and the sea doesn't stay in one place. So while we've done lots of science to identify marine protected areas being here, ecosystems change. So got to be ready to be flexible with your marine protected area. How do we move it? How do we work together? How do we track that? How do we even know if it's still there? So that kind of innovation, to be really agile and flexible and be ready to move with nature as it moves and work together to not be surprised or get caught out. So your investment goes into the wrong place. And this is aligned to technology as well, because how do you do all that tracking? You can now in ways you couldn't 20 years ago. So one of the quotes here is, you can use, satellites to track sea turtles, seabirds, other marine species amendments. We do a lot of work using satellite technologies as well. And we're getting close to near real time or real time understanding of what's happening in those areas. So the technology is coming to get us a much better, deeper, broader, and really easily accessible understanding of what's happening. So let's get ready to shift and pivot. So that's innovation, that is innovation in process and thinking and design using technology tools. The technology is the easy bit. As long as it can stand getting wet and get into a computer somewhere, you can do it. But what do you do with that information? How do you change your management practices? Another one on mobile MPAs. Yeah, so I think we've covered that. Yeah, I think we covered that on the previous one. So as we've talked a little bit about, just move on to the next one, please. Thank you. Satellite engagement. We may talk about this. Yeah, sorry, I've sped on. Can't stop myself sometimes. That's it. Cool. If we go back to the paper parks issue, why is it so hard to manage marine protected areas in a fully enforceable way? Because they're big, and because they weren't enforced 20 or monitored 20 or 30 years ago. And now you're creating a new challenge, obviously a new opportunity, that you have to monitor them. So if we look here, one of the things that's coming up on the side there is really swift developments in satellite technology and the level of detail you can get. So there you can see 2 boats there who are probably doing an illegal transshipment. When one of them's gone into a marine protected area, a no-take marine protected area, it's caught its fish, and then is bimbling along to offload that, goes somewhere, not write anything in a logbook. Anyone stops them, not me, Gov. I wasn't there. What are you talking about? But the good thing is we can track these activities from space now through a number of areas. The second part, which I'll talk about in the slides in a second, is the advancement in machine learning and artificial intelligence. The raw data is there, but more and more, a huge more amounts of satellite data are becoming available to monitor marine spaces. And the analogy I always use is, that's great, but if you still got one person on a desk trying to look at it, when you're trying to look for a needle in a haystack, what you don't want is a load more haystacks, and just more and more confusion. But the machine learning inputs and the artificial intelligence can be trained to look for risk, to look for examples of something that shouldn't be happening maybe. And you cut out the 80 or 90% of things that are happening and just focus on that 10, 20% or even fewer examples. And that's doing a huge amount of work harnessing two new technologies, satellite capabilities and machine learning, that then needs that human interface to say, I know these waters, what's going on there? That smells wrong. Let's have a look at that. And one of the examples we've done, moving on to the next one, in the Philippines was exactly doing that. Huge sea space like yourselves. And if we look on that left-hand side, just as I was saying, you've got satellite observation. It's not just technology. The most important thing is the human element and the human understanding. And people particularly who've been working on the sea spaces for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, they know what smells wrong. So this is about empowering humans to do things in a different way with advanced technologies. So here on the left, the kind of things you can pull in is, as well as the satellite observations, you've got vessel identities themselves through the AIS, vessel tracking there. All of this needs to align to fishing regulations themselves. Activity takes on a different complexion in various parts of the sea space. So it could be perfectly compliant here, cross a line, and it's not compliant there. So all of this needs to be fed into the system, as well as human intelligence as well, local intelligence. So put all that into a big powered system, keep 20 pence in the electricity meter to keep it going. And then on the right-hand side, you start to bring it into, if you could just click once more, there you go. You start to bring it into the human part. So we've done all the really hard work, seeing things from space. We've crunched all of that data. We're coming really closely to a number of things that look sus, look a little bit dodgy. I'll give you an example in a minute. That needs to go to an operator who understands what they're looking for, can convert that into what you often call in data actionable insights. That's something I didn't know. What I can do about that is this. And that's where you bring authorities in or start to change on that last part on the right-hand side, start to change activities. And if I just jump to the next slide to give you one final example of this kind of innovation, which is opening up potential to monitor marine protected areas and others at scale. Just move on to the next one, dark vessel. That's good. There we go. And just click once more. Whoa, there it is. Thank you. One of the things you can do with these new technologies coming is identifying what they call dark vessels. So that's where a vessel is bimbling along in your sea space. All of a sudden, it turns off its transponder, which would be tracking it normally. And then all of a sudden, 8 hours later, it turns it on again. And the level of complexity of the machine learning and the artificial intelligence can give you a prediction that it's likely over that time to have gone over that space, cruising at this speed. And guess what? That's a marine protected area. So it looks like that's worth investigating. Why did you turn your transponder off? There can be valid reasons for this, commercial protection, all that kind of stuff. But as I said, we're not talking about definitive computer-led intelligence on its own. It's saying there's a number of questions we'd like to ask this person about why they did those activities, and we'd like to check them. And then again, about resource that we're talking about, then it becomes a question of what do you do with that intelligence? Some of the earlier conversations you have with people who say, well, we're going to need more boats. Of course we can't, because it's a big sea space, but there isn't going to be enough money for a load more boats to cover all of your sea space. So you've got to start to think strategically. And that's where you would start to look at threat modeling. So some of the things we've done, and we've started to engage with your nation as well, is to do a backwards analysis of 2 years worth of satellite data. And then you start to see heat maps of the real hardcore traffic. And then once you've done that risk analysis, where do all the red dots appear? And then you can start to see, does that line up with what we thought was happening in our sea space? And it may be that by redeploying, and we've done some of this in the Philippines, we said we really want to shift our vessels, our patrol vessels and our enforcement vessels from this place to this place, because this data is telling us that's where the stuff's happening. But it's not just about that. The other sort of element of strategic inputs involves using your other monitoring capability. So when a boat comes into port, a fishing vessel comes into port, you can start to say, you can arm the onboard inspectors with intelligence before they go on. You can say, we know it's been there. We know we have this dark area, or we know it's been. The other thing, as an example, is it can show you one that Jonathan offered you is if you're traversing through an NPA, which you can do, either you're drunk, because why have you started to go like that? Or go in a fishing movement, and you can train the computers to spot that activity and that direction of travel. So all of this information can be put in the hands of an enforcement officer who will board that boat in port and say, can we have a little look at your logbook? Oh, that's funny, because that's not what we thought. They already know where you've been, they already know what you've done, and they've got some questions for you to do that. So again, it's not necessarily investing in huge amounts of physical infrastructure. It's tweaking and it's properly innovating, changing the system of operations to try and utilize what you have and do things in an exciting way. I think we'll talk and say, I think we're going to do some more on fisheries management innovation later, because I've got lots of really exciting videos that I like to show people about what's happening. But I think that will do now on MPA management and innovation. So I'm rounding up now. I think I started with it's early. So let's just understand, take a breath and really focus on the matters. Why? Because they work. The science shows that they work. 2 examples. Back in 2017, the meta-analysis of hundreds of studies showed that the biomass of whole fish assemblies in marine reserves is on average 670% greater than in unprotected areas right next to it. So the science is there. It works. We know it does. Another one, a Pew study in 2021 said the same thing. So it looked at Kenya examples, and by safeguarding 30% of its fishing grounds in a fully protected MBA, the Mombasa County was also not only able to compensate for lost fishing area, but also witnessed a substantial increase in fish populations. So we're regenerating, we're working out where the activity can continue safely. But this is what the blue economy is all about: being strategic and smart about your government and community and stakeholder interventions for everyone to benefit. So just to recap, if we take your exciting questions. Still early days, everyone can learn together. Next one, we are really seeing there's huge amounts of reasons to be cheerful about this. I think we are seeing greater understanding emerging. The arguments being one, more financial resources are being aligned. Everyone's scratching their heads. How do we get this resourced? And more effective case studies emerging. And in some of the NGO examples, I quoted earlier, I forgot to say, one of the really interesting things we've noticed is obviously NGO and government can sometimes have quite a fractious and oppositional relationship. Couple of the ways they're phrasing it now, but that England example where it said it was only 5, they weren't saying in their clarity of their message, the NGOs weren't saying you don't care about this. They weren't saying you aren't putting the thought in government. They weren't saying you don't understand marine protected areas. They were saying you're under-resourced. It's all there. And if you can get to that point where everyone says, you know what, we're all on the same page here. We all want this to work. Let's talk about making the resource happen. This is great. And as you say, the evidence would suggest they work. So the hard work is worth it. So we've talked about new money coming, how it's going to channel. And I think there are lots of really exciting reasons where we can say, let's channel it into MPAs because they're worth it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. It is really, really interesting. This all the speaker presented new things, new knowledge that we learn about. I think lots of participants would like to give a question to you. We still have plenty of time. However, I would like to share to my colleague to continue the discussion for the Q&A. I would like to invite Mariana. This time yours.
Thank you, Pak Andi. Actually, my name is Maharani. Maybe it's about, it's a little bit confusing because we have 2 moderators. So because the organizer asked us to have 2 moderators. Yeah, so because it's just joking because you know that the moderator certificates value higher than the participants. It's just a joke. Okay, first of all, I would like to thank for the facilitators, for the speakers, for the great presentations. It is a privilege for us to have you to present this all of it. Okay. Okay, now we begin for the Q&A session. So maybe we would like to separate in 3 sessions. the first time, may I sit down?
Of course you may. Of course.
I'm a bit in. Mungkin teman-teman apabila ada yang ingin bertanya, ini akan kita bagi ke dalam 3 sesi. Mungkin sesi pertama akan kita floorkan. Would like to ask you to deliver some questions to the floor. So you may raise your hand. You can ask by bahasa or English also.
Maju aja Mbak. Izin. Siap. Duduk aja izin.
Terima kasih banyak Ibu Moderator atas kesempatannya. Yang terhormat Bapak Kepala Balbes, Bapak narasumber, dan Bapak Ibu sekalian peserta kegiatan pada hari ini. Perkenalkan saya Supriyadi dari Pusat Pelatihan dan Penyuluhan Kelautan Perikanan. Mohon izin barangkali 3 pertanyaan Ibu. Tapi yang pertama, kalau kita barangkali update topik terkait dengan isu karbon ya. Jadi laju karbon yang lepas dengan kemampuan kita untuk mengembalikan ya atau menyerap kembali karbon ke dalam ekosistem, barangkali ini gapnya ini masih cukup besar ya. Jadi aktivitas ekonomi yang berdampak pada katakanlah pelepasan karbon gitu ya dari kegiatan industri khususnya di negara maju gitu ya. Nah ini kan kita masih mengandalkan kemampuan ekosistem kita, khususnya terlebih khusus di ekosistem perairan, terumbu karang, mangrove, lamun dan sebagainya. Ini hanya itu gitu ya. Nah, pertanyaan pertama saya adalah apakah ada teknologi yang bisa kita andalkan yang bisa membantu untuk menangkap si karbon itu gitu ya. Kemudian yang kedua ini yang terkait dengan kompensasi ya gitu. Artinya ketika kita ingin mengembalikan ya, atau kalau di ekosistem perairan ini kan kita ingin menangkap kembali ya karbon sink gitu ya. Nah ini kalau di PRL itu ada apa namanya, apa itu yang nelayan suruh nangkap apa sampah itu apa, BCL, nah itu mohon izin bakal. Jadi sebaiknya kita juga mungkin punya program nelayan suruh nangkap karbon gitu ya. Barangkali apa long term tidak pen. Tidak ada bulan cinta laut, tapi nelayan pada saat musim paceklik saya mau gantikan ini pohon mangrove saya depan rumah jadi suatu untuk menolong mereka gitu ya. Nah, bisa saja seperti itu gitu ya. Kemudian kita juga di pelaku utama kita, ada anak pelaku utama kita juga. Selain kita mendidik mereka terkait dengan pengetahuan lingkungan terkait dengan tadi ya karbon, juga mereka kita bisa berikan juga dari awal masuk kuliah Pak Kabalbas ya kan di AUP dan sebagainya, dan nanti bisa jadi sesuatu tabungan untuk kompensasi karbon juga. Barangkali terima kasih banyak. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Yeah, maybe you can give them some insight about that. Yeah, is there? Okay, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. The first question is that about the technology to absorb the carbon, because there are gaps between in and out carbon. Is there any technology? And the second is that about marine debris. How to is it questions or just is it a question or just oh okay. Yeah. Program about compensation, the compensation for the fishermen, yeah, the carbon bonds and the blue carbon about that, and then the third about the children from the fishermen. What do we? How to educate? Oh, is it a question or what I would like to ask, is it a question or just saran? Yeah, is it just yeah. Do you like to answer? Okay.
I think I understand. So I think you're asking a question about the difference between the rate at which carbon is committed to the atmosphere by human activity and the rate at which it's being absorbed by the oceans, and whether or not we need to do anything to close the gap between those two, because maybe is that the question? Is that what I might need to help, and it might need Joshua's help here. Joshua's been helping with translation for us. Okay, he'll be ready for the next question. Yeah, well, it's very interesting to be asked about that, because we were in Kuala Lumpur for the last couple of days, and there are companies there. One of the things we're working with there is investors and innovative technology providers, and some of the technology providers are developing methods of using renewable electricity, surplus renewable electricity. Once there's more power is being generated by wind and wave and ocean thermal energy conversion, so renewable energy resources based in the ocean space, floating solar. If they can make more electricity than the populations require, and we were specifically talking with the Republic of the Marshall Islands and Palau, and these companies have said that they can disperse surplus electricity into reef generation technologies. They can grow through a process of subsea electrolysis. They can grow rock that absorbs carbon from the ocean space. So there are some really interesting new technologies that are being applied, and we've seen samples of this rock now. They brought to the event to show us where you can grow rock that absorbs carbon from the sea space to help close the gap. But I would say that my favorite, my ideal, my dream would be to see some of Ralph's ideas move forward and expand further, because the idea, I think, that we have a capacity for greater biodiversity, so the planet can hold a more diverse, more dense diversity of nature, and that nature therefore would be able to absorb more carbon, and will be rebalancing using nature-based solutions. So there are technical solutions, but I think that if we can grow the density of biodiversity, then that's an excellent solution as well. I think, does that answer your question? Okay. And the second question, I might let Andy have a go at that one. So are you asking about how does the money get to the fishermen? Yes, that is a good question. Would you like to tackle that, Andy? Or
thanks, Jason. I'm just looking at no, of course I would. Yeah, of course I would. Yeah, I think that picks up on my point. Let's look at the flow. There are new sources of revenue coming, and technology going to kind of drive that up. There are new mechanisms emerging to channel that. And this is why we've talked about MPAs, but it's got to be entirely strategic, cross-cutting blue economy. Everyone needs to see themselves in that space. Fisher folk, we feel, have a really bad rep. Everyone talks about illegal fishing. We do, trying to do so, but at the heart of it, why we work so hard is we've met fisher folk communities. We think they're great. We think they do amazing things in their community, the vast majority of them. And it's a reliable source, both of income and of food security. So they are one part of a big field. So that's where the government needs to have a proper strategic overview, and really encouraging to see the amount of departments already involved here. It is everyone's issue. Everyone will bring ideas to the table. Everyone will know how to channel that resource in the best way possible so that everyone wins, because of the opportunity for everyone to win. So hope that answers your question.
I agree with you, Andy. I think that's that is really important to have that strategic piece. And what I was going to add to it, and I know I'm referencing some slides that I've already mentioned, but that ability to disperse funds. If you look at the model that Belize has used and that Seychelles has used, some of the people they disperse funds to are in the fishing communities, and they're supporting them with how to capitalize on the market opportunity that their fish gives them, how to I was going to say how to learn, but I think it's rediscover the importance of working in harmony with nature, because that's established through generations before and is starting to be lost as different pressures come upon us in the world. So I think those mechanisms, if you have the strategic framework that Andy suggested, and you have that cross-government and cross-community stakeholder engagement, and then you set up the right dispersal mechanisms, the money can get back to the fisher folk, and you can tap into the wisdom that they have of the communities and the environments that they live within.
Yeah.
So this is how good your question is. We can't shut up. So, I'll just add two more things to that. I think there's a real role within this once it gets to it. Innovation, again, is not technology, it's process. It's how you do things and how you work. And there are other things in other parts of the community and voluntary sector can use, for example, to address that, and all kinds of community budgeting, where the whole community can come together, budgets are allocated, and then they get allocated locally. There are challenges to it, don't get me wrong, but what you're doing then is building on local knowledge and local need. The other thing I'd add to that, though, go back to my strategy point, it's really important that the blue economy is a unifier for people talking in different languages. Everyone is, I've done a lot of cross-sectoral community government work. Everyone comes from here and here and here, and it's hard to see how you do it. We would always say, start with your existing national development plan. That sets out what your country needs, what its aspirations are, if it's jobs, if it's growth, if it's food security, all that. And then try and bring everyone together to say, that's what we are trying to achieve across the country. Where do you fit? You'll probably fit better over here than over here. Let's all use an example of an already understood framework to work out how we disperse stuff.
Okay, thank you. Is it answer? Oke, maybe ya mungkin untuk menyimpulkannya adalah bahwa mungkin itu adalah tugas kita ya sebagai pemerintah, terutama Kementerian Kelautan dan Perikanan, bagaimana dari this blue bond can be transferred to the fishermen. Yeah, it is our roles, the government. Okay, so the next questions, Bu Danar.
Terima kasih, good morning kepada moderator. Mengapresiasi acara yang dilaksanakan oleh Balai Besar Riset Sosial Ekonomi untuk membuka wawasan kita terkait dengan Blue Finance ya. Saya Triana Nari dari Pusat Riset Perikanan, Center of Fisheries Research. Mau menanyakan, saya tertarik dengan Blue Bonds ya. Jadi tadi disampaikan kalau negara Belize itu, dan saya pernah membaca bahwa negara Belize itu mendapatkan keringanan utang dengan mereka harus membangun program-program yang bersifat konservasi. Nah, untuk Indonesia sendiri, tadi saya lihat di Google, utang Indonesia kan sudah 300 miliar 300 million US dollar. Nah, apakah program-program seperti keringanan utang itu seperti yang di Belize lakukan itu bisa diterapkan di Indonesia? Jadi Indonesia mungkin harus menganggarkan program-program, lebih banyak program untuk konservasi. Itu yang pertama. Yang kedua, mau menanyakan untuk proyek-proyek Blue Bonds itu kan biasanya masuk ke proyek pinjaman yang biasanya harus melibatkan pemerintah. Dan biasanya itu 60-70% digunakan untuk infrastruktur. Sisanya mungkin untuk pemberdayaan, untuk manajemen proyek dan sebagainya. Salah satu infrastruktur yang harus kita kan kalau tidak salah ya, Blue Bonds itu kan juga merupakan investasi dari negara-negara di luar ya untuk menginvestasikan untuk proyek-proyek yang bersifat environment atau yang bersifat untuk kelestarian lingkungan. Nah, apakah infrastruktur apabila kita mengajukan proyek yang didanai melalui Blue Finance itu infrastrukturnya harus yang sifatnya return of investment-nya itu tinggi. Karena kan nanti itu harus balik lagi kan untuk pembayaran. Kemudian yang kedua, salah satu tantangan kita seperti tadi disampaikan oleh narasumber ketiga bahwa apabila kita membangun infrastruktur yang high-tech, itu mungkin tantangan kita adalah keberlanjutan untuk pengelolaan infrastruktur yang high-tech tersebut. Nah, apakah ada solusi-solusi misalkan tadi penyediaan sistem remote sensing untuk pendataan kapal misalkan IU fishing apa-apa. Pasca proyek itu selesai pasti operasionalnya akan tinggi. Nah, itu apakah ada strategi atau rekomendasi untuk keberlanjutan bahwa infrastruktur yang didanai dari proyek-proyek yang bersifat Blue Finance ini bisa sustain gitu. Karena biar tidak lagi setelah beberapa tahun karena kekurangan biaya operasional jadi mangkrak. Mungkin itu dulu, mohon maaf dalam bahasa Indonesia daripada nanti tidak tertangkap maksudnya. Ya, makasih.
Iya, terima kasih Bu Danar. Pertanyaannya keringanan utang, iya bantu aja deh.
Mohon izin ya, maaf kalau bahasanya ada yang beberapa teknis, kalau ada yang salah mohon bantuan Bapak Ibu. So the question is that she interested in blue bonds, okay? Seeing from the BILIS, okay, receive the relief, what kind of similar program that can be applied in Indonesia to relieve the debt that currently Indonesia has? Ya, benar ya? Oke. Relief, yeah, to the debt relief. Yes. Yeah, the relief tax, debt relief.
Go ahead, Jordi. Yeah. We'd have to look into some details, but what gives us confidence is that, as you say, Belize has done a debt for nature swap, and so has Seychelles, so that a precedent has been set. Precedence has been set, I should say. So there's a model. What we now need to do is see how close that model fits Indonesia, and it would be disingenuous of me to say, oh yes, it's easy, without doing some more research into it. But we do know that what success looks like, and we've probably got a lot of the data, amongst the team here as to what Indonesia has. And so with the right guidance and pathway, we could make a valid assessment as to whether it would. It would be wonderful, wouldn't it, if you could use it as either a debt for nature swap, or whether you could generate additional revenue and GDP that you could then use to offset and pay back debt. I can see the aspiration, and that would be an exciting thing to test and validate and hopefully to then apply. I hope that addresses it as best as we can based on the knowledge we have at hand here.
JT is the expert on this, but I won't stop me saying anything. So I think your presentation was so good, JT, that no one's asking, is it possible they're spending the money already, which is good. It comes back to, okay, three things. One, JT's right. Not just this, but all across the blue economy, there are case studies happening everywhere, which is brilliant. Because then you look at half a dozen of them, it inspires you and catalyzes you to think about how it works, and then you do the science and you can see what it's do. But I think you're asking the right question now, because that science will take some time. What you don't want to do is wait until it's all there and then have to spend another 3, 4, 5 years to try and work out how to disperse it. So all of these thinking should really happen collaboratively. As you talking about the value, and once you understood the value of reducing debt or whatever else it is you want to do, that could probably be a catalyst to drive, get it done, because we need it now. And it's a new way of doing it. So really important question to start thinking about the full life process of what this would look like.
Just to add to that again, these are good questions, by the way. This is good. They're the fiscal position of a nation based on part of that judgment is the asset base, and so the blue carbon angle is, it's not just about the earning some money and using it to offset the debt. It's changing the asset base of the entity, the national entity in its own right, by taking the natural asset and as Ralph says, being able to capitalize it, being able to hold it as a legal capital on the balance sheet of the nation. So certainly I know from other conversations with Ralph, as well as what he's mentioned in his presentation today, that he sees the opportunity to increase the asset value, the financial asset value of nations by doing the blue carbon piece, and it does make perfect sense. And Ralph is one of the world experts on this from establishing national economies. So I'm definitely guided by his wisdom.
Okay, thank you. Or maybe is there Ralph is online? Okay. Then the second and the third question is it apa mau dilanjutkan atau ditanyakan? Jadi the second and the third question is about the infrastructure, because you know that to implement the blue bond we need capital, we need to develop the infrastructure. So how is it right? How to blue bond is from the great allocation is infrastructure. The kind of the infrastructure that we need to develop. Apa tadi? By blue finance, do we have to have the infrastructure with the return of high return of investment?
It's the idea is to have a sufficient number of projects that balance a revenue stream. So it's a portfolio of activity to a value. So to take the reference that again, as I said, we'll share, but from ADB, there's the sort of 500 million blue bond valuation would sit against projects with revenue of a potential revenue of a billion to 1.5 billion. So but that wouldn't just be one project, that would be a balance of projects, and it would be the net effect that they're looking at beyond across the portfolio. So that's a volume and value is the thing to look at with the project portfolio. The volume of the projects, so there's a degree of diversity and therefore resilience, and therefore removing risk rather than one big project, because the confidence comes from there being less risk, and the valuation of the individual projects added together to be able to say, there's a robust and resilient revenue plan to underpin the thinking.
Sudah bisa menjawab. Ya, udah ya. Yeah. The third question, to the blue bond project that implement high technology. After the projects, we would have the challenge to apa? Mendapat tantangan untuk apa? We have the challenge to operate the high tech. So the question is that is there any to implement the blue bond, we need to operate the high tech, right? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, is there any strategy? Oh, because the blue bond, the implementation of blue bond required the high technology. So after the project, how to maintain the operation of the high tech. So what are the strategy? Because the challenge is to operate the high tech technology, and maybe because of the high tech, maybe a high cost. So what are the strategy to implement it so sustainably?
Okay, so I understand the question. I think that when pulling together a portfolio, I think of projects, the way to do it is to consider the context of the national strategy as to what needs to be achieved and the threats and the risks that face the nation. What do you want to overcome and improve upon? How do you want to improve aspects of your national risk register? How do you want to improve fish stocks, whatever the thing is that you do, controlling waste, whatever the aspects are, making a shift from oil burning to renewable energy, whatever the mechanisms are. And then you need to think about the duration of the project, and where you are now, you can't change, but where you're going to be in the future, you can control. So taking the starting point, you need to understand institutional capacity within the country. So the skills of the labor force, the capacity and capability of the labor force. That's your starting point. And you can have an aspiration then built into the roadmap that leads you towards projects. So if you feel like you need to move to high tech, but you don't have the capacity or the capability now, then that needs to be incorporated into the portfolio of projects to represent that those projects will come online later, but then you need to fill the gap between the now and the later with a credible plan as to how to build that capacity in. And some of it might be anchored against these projects are coming, and it's been now written into the national strategy as how we're going to deliver it to make these high-tech projects. So you start to create the self-fulfilling prophecy of where you want to be. Yeah, I accept that it's not wholly dependent on high technology. But some of the early projects might be at a lower level of technology to enable you to get started. And it may be that the first issuance is more modest in size because of that limitation, but the ability to follow through on that first issuance and to demonstrate the various levels of governance and adherence and so forth gives confidence to the market that a second issuance then can move forward into higher technology. Does that make sense, Sandy? Do you want to add anything to that, or?
Thank you. Another great question. So we do quite a lot of work on the technological side, and it's a perfect question. I would say technology isn't the answer. Human use of technology is quite often the answer, because there are huge infrastructure, the resource in this room and across all the departments. It's about that interface between the two of them. I'd say luckily there are lots of really good and well thought out development funds and ways of approaching technology and investing technology where they ask all of the right questions, including how this will live a life beyond a highly paid consultant coming in and doing it. How does it live a life and embed itself into the infrastructure of an organization or a community or whatever it is? So the good investment programs, they get that right. And they analyze and assess and only let people through the gate if they aren't just there to foist something on it, but they're thinking really long-term sustainability, and we want this to bed in. Lots of questions need to be answered to do that, but I say that there are good models there. One thing we haven't really used, a word we haven't used that much, but it's kind of in everything, which is partnership. a lot of, again, we work a lot with technology developers. That's where a lot of innovation comes from. And that can either come from a deep understanding of what you call the domain, the area you're trying to make an impact in, the ocean or communities or hunger or whatever it is, and you come that way. But quite often it actually comes from a technologist who understands how to do something, who can go into their shed and build it and do all the science. And then they have a learning curve to go through to understand the environment they're working in, the marine space, work with marine biologists or local communities or the government, and that interface between technologists, funders, users, operators is how a really good funded technology program. But again, that question, ask that early enough, you'll get the right ones coming forward, and then I can see you'll keep them on their toes. So keep it going, get it the right way.
Sudah menjawab.
And reassuring to know you're located so close to the Innovation Bureau for exactly that reason.
Sudah Mbak Danar, ya katanya memang pertanyaan juga cukup sulit ya. Oke, lanjut ke pertanyaan yang ketiga, silakan Ibu. Pertanyaannya satu saja ya Bu. Dua mungkin. Oh dua, tas satu-satu ya, saya jadi bingung kalau ini langsung. Oh ya, udah bahasa Inggris aja kalau gitu ya Bu.
Yeah, thank you very much for all presenters since this morning. I enjoy your talks and the presentations are very good and very give us insights and knowledge to Indonesian cases. I would like to ask for all three speakers. I hope the first speaker is still join with us. Okay, so my question is related with the first presentations, but I do hope for both of you are here, the speakers can give some answers related with my questions. The first question is, the first presenters showed us the global warming and climate change is very closely to the impact of the marine biodiversity, also for the biodiversity inland. So in this morning, we can see there is the two cases, the big cases for the sequestration carbon because of the sting of mammals of whales. And the second one is from the elephant. And for these two cases actually is a different approach. I think for the elephant currently, I think it's not only in Indonesia, but around the world, the elephant species already more reduced, right? So this kind of thing is because of the deforestation, probably is one of the factor. But for the whales is very closely with the natural impact of the climate change, because its mammal currently are reported by the IPCC reports, all kind of marine biodiversity, including mammals, including whales, is very few because of the climate change. Indonesia is located in the between Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, and also Indo-Australian Basin. So for the climate change impact to Indonesia, we have to include things for the monitoring and observations, especially in the ocean, because of the marine biodiversity is one of the big factor of the impact of the climate change. My question is, what we need is the adaptation and the mitigation, and we need also the science and knowledge of the climate driver like ENSO. And in Indonesia, we are very sensitive because of the changes of the ENSO and IOD, and also from the Australian monsoon. So what we need here is decadal variability. What we want to get the information impact to the Indonesian seas and to the marine biodiversity. I know in the case of the European climate change is probably have a different factor. But what I would like to ask, this is challenging if you can implement the method, the strategic plan in the European to the Indonesian side about the adaptation and mitigation closely to the marine biodiversity impact and also the marine protected area. I think it's not like the budget of the European, how far for the adaptation and mitigation and how it's look like. And Indonesian archipelago, we have a different characteristic also for marine biodiversity and also in climate impact, like in the Eastern Indian Ocean and the West Indian Ocean, there's really quite different. So what we need is seasonal variability, interannual variability, and decadal variability. And for the global warming and climate change, that one should be in decadal variability. So I think if you want to implement your project to Indonesia, I think perfectly what we need at least 10 years project. So what we need is what's your method, what's your strategy? It is related with the monitoring observation for the marine biodiversity, because I think we need also the technology for kind of the looking for the information of the marine biodiversity. So, and another one is the MPA. The MPA and the about the strategic plan, because on the last speaker you saw that about the Maluku project. That one is Eastern Indian Indonesian. Okay, that's all. I hope you can get the point. I think my question is pretty it's not too specific, because I need your global concept also that I hope you can explain is more detailed. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mbak. Maybe you can just answer directly.
There's quite a few levels to that, I think. I'm not sure. I'm thinking out loud now because I'm not sure where to start, how to address that. I think it's yeah, I might need to compute this one. Jump in, Andy, if you have an answer to address it while I consider.
Okay, scratch your head. I'll be coming back to you soon. 3 minutes, go. Okay. I think this is one of the beauties and the challenges of talking about the blue economy marine space. So broad, so vast, and all these issues that are fighting for space in there. But thank you for raising climate change, obviously, as a key issue, because it's there. My response to that would be, in that sort of broad strategic sweep, which I really do believe is happening. And we call ourselves skeptical optimists. We really want this to happen, but we will say, is it really happening? We always answer, is this actually happening? I think it is. I think people are taking blue economy seriously. What we have been doing recently, and there's a long way to go, is to talk about marine renewable energy. And that is part of a shift to stop just talking about the oceans as oceans in crisis. Yes, sea level rise. Yes, acidification. Yes, loss of coral reefs. Yes, fish degradation, fish stock, all there. But carbon sequestration and marine renewable energy. And the technologies are rapidly advancing. A lot in Northwest Europe have been tested and proven. We've had offshore wind now, particularly in Scotland and others, is now producing loads on the grid. We are now moving to floating offshore wind, so it's going out. So you've got higher spaces. And I forget the number, JT might remember it in a minute. But there is enough marine renewable energy to power the world dozens and dozens and dozens of times over. We're behind the curve. I think the technology is coming up. I think the results are there to show that this is converting. And there's another thing we've been picking apart around particularly focusing on small island, what we call large ocean states. And the argument there, obviously they're the most vulnerable to climate change impacts, sea level rise and all the rest of it. And they've got all this water, and we know there's more that can be done. But there's also there's the commercial angle on this, not necessarily just having to think about grant money and development back money. There are new innovations and regulations coming involved that you can start to convert electricity locally into exportable products such as ammonia and hydrogen. That never happened before. The commercial money wasn't flowing into marine renewable energy in the large ocean states, small island states, because it could only, your returns wouldn't be there because you're just coping with the local demand and there won't be enough money to get the investors satisfied. These technologies now and the conversion in there also aligned to the broader push for decarbonisation in maritime transport and aviation fuel, etc. There's a market demand here. There's new technology that convert marine energy, and there's new technology that can convert that into an exportable product. That is hugely exciting, hugely exciting. And again, it flips it around to showing that the marine space is a massive untapped resource. Got to come back to the sustainable use of it as well. And we're already starting to think, and where we were just announcing winners of projects in Kuala Lumpur, to say, okay, don't just be marine energy. How can you use that to drive aquaculture? How can you build ecotourism into it? Let's get co-located projects open from the start, energy at the heart of it. And then you're helping the local economy reduce their energy costs. We all know what they're like at the minute. You're creating new export and new jobs for there, but ultimately, almost quietly underneath that, you're really helping to address climate change impacts and reduce global footprint. I gave you 5 minutes rather than 3, so you've been very lucky.
I'm not sure what I could add to that. That's pretty good. What could I add to that? Is there anything that Andy didn't cover that you'd like to explore? My own opinion, I think Andy's really good at this. I think it is entwined. I think of Ralph uses a phrase of indigenous people, and I said to him, "We're all the indigenous people of this planet." And you think of it as a closed ecosystem, and you think we really are part of nature, and so that very, very strong correlation between the climate and the environment and the way in which we operate within that, not outside it, but within both, is crucial. And I am heartened by the technologies that we've seen developing, and I can see applications for them in Indonesia. We're very fortunate to be able to explore a little bit of your country while we're here over the next couple of days. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of the live projects on the ground that are tackling these issues directly. I think you have a vast ocean space with some considerable surface area as well as depth, and the biodiversity in there has economic value in many, many directions. And I'm sure we'll see transitions towards blue hydrogen markets where you're positioned globally in terms of shipping lanes and things. You have a strategic advantage to be able to offload innovative fuel types like that to many thousands of vessels that transit through your waters every year. So you're geographically well placed and blessed with substantial assets, and now's the opportunity to capitalize upon that, I think.
Now maybe we can move on to the question from online. Is that fine? Okay. Mungkin saya tidak akan membaca semuanya, tapi ada beberapa pertanyaan yang akan saya bacakan dan deliver to the speakers. The first is from Nuraini. The question is, can you inform us what kind of blue carbon for wetland like lake, river, riparian area, and that can be claimed as blue carbon? And then the second, do you want to ask?
I love that question. Yeah, okay. It's something that we've been asked by some nations in Africa who have large lakes, and I was fascinated by the if you look at Lake Victoria, the invasive water hyacinth species there is a blight upon them. It makes it very difficult. It's choking the water, and it's affecting fish and affecting local livelihoods. But you turn it on its head, and you've got a massive amount of carbon being trapped in that water hyacinth as it grows. So I think there is a strong argument for blue carbon in inland waterways as well as in the ocean. And yeah, it's sensible to think about it in all dimensions. It's a really good question.
Okay. So to the next question.
Yeah. Just to add to that, the one, they're down there. Thank you, Jordi. The other point there is in terms of the modelling for this. a name was mentioned by Ralph, marine biologist Carlos Duarte, who is building and working with Ralph on individual models for different habitat types. So the science is advancing there. So we're getting to the point now where we can say mangrove of a certain density and area has a value of, seagrass of a certain area and density and depth has a value of, and being able to extrapolate then from the flora, from the plant habitat, what the ecosystem might be worth. And you, Andy, shared some statistics from Pew around the improvement in density of biodiversity as a percentage. So we can starting to quite exciting to be able to advance the science and start to be able to make some predictions onto values, and then to be able to be able to monitor that. So yeah, excellent question. Thank you.
So we're going to the next question. So you can, I would like to read. Okay, from the third from Joshua. How does it work with the buying of the carbon credit? How does it monetize? How does it monetize? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so it is what's really important is that you end up with we call a homogeneous asset, a tradable asset. So every asset in the financial markets can be traded against, there's parity. So $1 is worth $1. There's parity between the two. So one carbon credit needs to be worth one carbon credit for it to work. So we use a ton of carbon at the minute as a mechanism, and it needs to have a value that allows it to be traded. So as supply and demand shifts, it can be traded as a financial certificate, as a commercial asset. So think of it in that's really helpful. Thank you. Think of it carbon credits as currency. Think of it as the same way. It's just the legal framework that we take something of value like gold and we represent it in banknotes. We're going to take something of value, the ability to sequestrate carbon, and represent it in a digital currency. So it's monetized and tradable in the same way as banknotes, is the same way as other bonds and futures and shares are traded on carbon exchanges.
I'm going to jump in here quickly because this is JT's specialty. So if I have one idea, I've got to get in. Otherwise, I won't say anything for the rest of the day. So what I think this comes back to my point, I think, on collaboration and how we are flipping the way of viewing things. Ralph obviously is doing the economic and scientific analysis of this and coming up with models. There are others. Ralph's one of the leading ones. There are others who are trying to work it through and answer those questions. What I would say, as someone who's worked mainly in the voluntary and public sector all my life, but working with investors, if it begins to stack up, the money people will make it work, because that's their job, to make money. If we say there's an asset here and there's a market here, government almost just needs to be an enabler then, make it work, because the people who will derive value from that, I think their brains will join in the room and try and work out if that happens, because there will be revenue in other ways as well, I think. So it's about thinking in things in new ways and also seeing it, as Ralph says, win-win-win. So the environment's going to win, the government's going to win, other people in the middle of that chain might win a little bit, but as long as they're contributing their ideas and understand that the ethics of it all has to remain there. So I think the argument stacks up, bring big brains from various areas, kick it about, and I think we'll get there.
Oke, thank you. Mungkin mudah-mudahan jawabannya bisa memuaskan ya. Kalau misalnya tidak, bila masa jawabannya ini bisa di email saja kepada kami atau langsung kepada mereka ya. Terus the next question is from Mausyada and Miss M. Rudi Wahyono. The first is, can you tell me about the effect of blue carbon in our life and what the method to value blue carbon in specific area and how to verify the value?
Okay, so the first question, how does it affect our lives? It's substantially and significantly. It's a huge change. We're talking about a massive paradigm shift in economics and the potential for some countries that are on overseas development aid lists to not be on overseas development aid lists, to vastly expand their GDP and their debt ratio. So a substantial change as countries that were poor can become prosperous through a new financial mechanism that the world needs. The method of valuing blue carbon is an emerging science. To the second element of that question, I suppose, there are economists who are working on that. I would point you to the work of the likes of the Discupta report that was published by the UK government, I think a year ago or 2 years ago, which talks about the value of biodiversity. I'd point you to the work of Professor Rashid Samilia of British Columbia University as a marine economist, and of course the work of Carlos Duarte and Ralph Shami, who we've met Ralph Shami today, but Carlos Duarte he's working with, who these people are leading the thinking really in the world for how carbon can be valued. And it's really important because those certificates that are issued need to be trusted by the financial markets, and the transparency with which they're issued and verified is a really important point of the second question there. We advocates of we call surveying from space and using technologies like that to understand things. And we work with companies that can take optical Earth observation images and from that extrapolate the health of benthic habitats and biodiversity. So you can start to use artificial intelligence mechanisms to process large areas of data and determine what's physically there. And then there's no substitute for then ground truthing that data, working with local communities, engaging them via mechanisms of survey and science and research to go and prove that what the large area, the satellite's seen, can be verified. And doing that in perpetuity, doing that regularly and forever once you've owned that asset. So building in that monitoring into your capability so that you have reporting that will meet the stringent needs of the global financial markets, because the value of these assets is substantial, and for them to be traded, they need to be trusted. So yeah, two really good questions there. I'm not sure if it also answers the next question down, which is the value of nature-based economy. How is it accepted in other countries? And is there established a system accepted and valuing the commodity? I think there are, and I think it can be exported. But I think there's an interesting race on here that there will be new exchanges, new markets opening up, and in the same way as any financial asset is validated by different organizations, the Goldman Sachs and the Moody's and these global organizations that put a value on an effectively a certificate. It will self-level eventually, but at the minute we're seeing different valuations coming in from different people, and that's creating a market in its own right, because it means that an asset could be worth different amounts in different spaces, and so it gets traded as currency does, as other assets do.
Thanks, and I'll just add a side point on that about valuations in general. We've just been working with the government of Jamaica and their planning institute to try and do some baselining on their blue economy, so you can get an understanding of where they are and where they want to go. And in a couple of other areas, we've done the same thing. The issue that will come up again and again and again is the availability of reliable data. And this is going to become a really important point now with these opportunities emerging. With more heat and light shown to the blue economy in general, there is patchy collection of data in the marine area in various parts of the world. And so you can't get an accurate picture unless you do that. So there's going to be investment, there's going to need to be capacity building, there's going to be new stories have to be told, and shifting of existing resource or new resource to try and do the things that will underpin everything. We're talking technology transfer, all of that's there. This is complex. We're obviously being positive about it, but there's some really hard work, particularly on those early stages, to get the data in the right place, in the right format, across the whole way. But if you get there, just not quite on this, but the American government is leading the way in that they've set up just across their normal marine economy departments, and they've managed to rationalize that and have blue economy satellite accounts, where they've done the hard work to say, well, what is our blue economy? What's in it? What's out of it? And how does their contribution to GDP come together, so we can get a sense of how big it is? And guess what? It contributed $360 billion to the US economy in 2020. That is a calling card to say, actually, if we've done this, then you can start to say, let's invest more in the data of natural capital. We're scratching the surface here. So those kind of models in terms of the data you need to collect and the story you can tell with it are emerging as well, which I think will feed into this.
Okay, maybe question number 7, I think it's similar to question from our audience, right? Yeah, the first questions. So maybe because we still have time to 12 o'clock, maybe we can continue. What about we give opportunity to the audience in the online who raise hand? Is that okay? Who raise hand? So panitia apakah bisa mengakomodir untuk yang raise hand? Mungkin satu saja. Siapa yang pertama? Silakan. Ada siapa nih yang raise hand? Who raise hand? Azmi Nasution? Ya, silahkan untuk memberikan pertanyaan kalau bisa dalam bahasa Inggris dan satu pertanyaan saja. Bapak Azmi Nasution? Apakah ada? Kalau tidak ada, silakan kepada Bapak Muslimin. Bapak Muslimin? Tidak ada juga. Bapak Permana Yudiana?
Ya, terima kasih. Terima kasih. Thank you for the opportunity. It is very interesting, Excellencies and resource person. Thank you very much for the presentation. It is very interesting for me. I would like to ask for the first presentation about the blue bond. The current the government of Indonesia has a green sukuk or sukuk hijau. It is issued in 2018 actually, and according to the blue bond presentation given by Pak Ralph, it is very interesting for me because in the future, government spending for managing marine and ocean, particularly marine protected area, is very low, and blue bond could be a potential sources of finance to assist or to help government to better manage the MPA. My question is it possible to what would you call it, to integrate it between the blue bond, what Mr. Raab proposed, into the existing one, the green sukuk in Indonesia? Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's an excellent vision. I think I don't know enough about the green bond, the sukuk mechanism, so I couldn't answer accurately whether you could integrate it or otherwise, and the degree of compatibility in what the green bond was based on in terms of an asset class and so on and so forth. So I don't know whether it would integrate without looking into it and conducting some research. But I do agree that in my ideal world, or our ideal world, that blue bonds do allow the financing of MPA management, and Andy mentioned the need from a transition globally from paper parks, these MPAs that are written down but not actually utilized, to real managed and marine protected areas, and that blue bonds would be a wonderful way of doing that, and a very positive source of finance for doing it. And the other thing I'd say is I think you create a virtuous circle by doing that. You end up with the value of the MPA increasing, and therefore creating larger budgets to maintain and survey and underline some of the science needs that then improve the ability to understand the position and to strengthen it again. So I hope we can get to that tipping point where we can create that virtuous circle. And the other thing I'd say is that there is a degree of expense in managing marine protected areas, patrolling them. Even if you do it in a cost-effective way, it's still a cost to understanding what's going on. No cost and low cost satellite data is available, but you still have to process it and analyze it and understand it. And there's teams of people, and some of your sea spaces, as we've said, are vast. They're huge areas. But if you can use the same data multiple times, if you can use the same data to inform your science, as well as your enforcement, as well as governance, as well as financial governance and assurance to the markets about what's there, you're making a single investment in data and understanding your ecosystem, but you're applying it in multiple ways. And surely that's the most cost-effective way of doing it. Andy.
Just to continue the thread on the data point you were finishing with there, again, it's one of the critical pillars of a blue economy and successful management of MPAs. I'd say a couple of developments are encouraging. So there are large NGOs, our friends at Global Fishing Watch, for example, are investing in infrastructure and actually working with governments to get them to make vessel tracking data free to all, because everyone then can use it and analyze it and work together with it. So that value of data, someone investing in making it available to all, is really interesting. And a similar point we've seen, I think the New Zealand Navy conducted some seabed mapping and bathymetry data collection for the islands in the Pacific, and then donated it to them. A new form of donation. We've got the assets. We want to go around these areas anyway. Why don't we collect the hydrography, bathymetry, seabed mapping data for you and then give it to you, which starts to address the point we were talking about natural capital. So there are new understandings of data and new investments from those who have slightly deeper pockets to allow others to utilize it, which again is encouraging.
So because we still have time, so maybe we can answer back to the question online. Maybe Ibu Husnul bisa
the next one's about skills, wasn't it?
The next is from number 8, right? So in no 8 already answered. So number 9. When it comes to utilizing and increasing capitals or monetizing of blue carbon, what are the roles between government and private sectors or NGO? What are the Number 9. Number 9. Roles between government.
So I guess it's utilizing and increasing capital, monetization of blue carbon. The question is, what are the roles between government and private sectors and NGO? I've worked in all three. And a lot of the time I was doing that brokerage role, getting everyone together who were all often in the same space. So I used to be in youth work, I used to be in democratic engagement, now I'm in the marine space. Everyone who's in that space wants to do good. Does not feel like it, but they do all want to do good. So you just got to try and work out where the alignment is, shared visions. There's room for spikiness as well, but also pick a little bit up on one of the questions we haven't answered about skills. Everyone can do things differently. Everyone has different approaches. Everyone has different things they can bring to the table. So I'm a great advocate of really more increased working between governments, private sectors and NGOs. I would take it back up to blue economy. There are some really strong examples emerging in the Caribbean and in Canada and other areas where they're setting out proper 2-year stakeholder engagement strategies to help develop a blue economy, and doing all that hard work and investing properly in open consultations and engaging with groups and being really public about it, There's some differences here. We're bringing it all together, but ultimately policies and activities thrive when everyone sees themselves in it and they can see their ideas being recognized and formulated and taken forward. So hopefully that answers the question. Is yes, more. Everyone has something to bring to the table, and then everyone can help deliver because they're owning. So I'd say more of it, please.
Okay, thank you. Because we have limited time, maybe one more question, but I can give you a chance to choose one from all the questions that has not been delivered.
I want to answer them all. I'm greedy.
Yeah, you can choose one.
I'm going to take. Go.
You,
So polite. My mum would be ashamed of me.
One for you and one for.
I'm just seeing if I can. I'm going to see if I can.
I can do. We might be able to do all three because I'm going to combine two.
Oh, that's
11 and 12, I can see an overlap. How to ensure the marine protected area will not be damaged by human activity. There's and we know expanding MPA will give impact in local society, especially in local economy aspects. So that question for me, there's an element of overlap with the next question about blue economy in relation to national defense, national security. Because one of the threats is human activity, and you're changing. In effect, you're not from a United Nations legislation perspective, but in effect, you're moving risk outside of your border. You're changing the border of your country. You're changing where the value of your nation sits when you implement a blue economy. What do I mean by that? Your border is your land and your territorial water, where you have the greatest control of your nation. Your exclusive economic zone stretches out beyond the border. It's not. It's an area that you can take an economic yield from, but it's not governed. People have different rights of passage and things at sea and so on. And if you look into the United Nations Convention of Law of the Sea, you'll see how that works. So you've changed the risk profile of your nation. If you say my GDP is largely within my territorial waters and the land, it's close. It's within 12 miles. You can see it from coastal radar. You occupy it because it's where you live. If you move it outside of that 12 nautical miles and out into the exclusive economic zone, economic value of your nation is now sitting beyond your border. And so from a national security perspective, you need to be able to understand how to patrol that space, how to monitor that space, and it changes the game because you now need to be able to justify how your Navy or your Coast Guard or your authorities of governance structure can monitor that space in a different way because there's a greater economic value to it. And this is an area that we've started working with the Royal Navy on delivering training through the Royal Navy to international navies on how the role of national security and national defense changes when you leverage more of the value of the sea space. So there's a piece about education here about human activity at a local level, which is mentioned in the question 11 there, about how people that live within MPAs and border on MPAs, and these are huge sea spaces, we acknowledge how they understand the change in the paradigm of the value that's there so that they can say, well, actually, the way we interface with the sea, we found actually we realize is damaging. What can we do? Where can we bring investment in? How can we bring projects on and sustain them that allow us to work more in harmony with the ocean space? And then from a national level, how can we monitor that sea space in a cost-effective way, but recognizing the increased value of that sea space and using that to leverage and justify the budgets that are required to look after it properly. And it's internationally a challenge. So it's a question 12 in particular is a great question. Internationally, this is a challenge. Almost everywhere you go, they say, we don't have enough vessels. We can't monitor it. We don't really understand what goes on beyond 12 nautical miles. It's a challenge. It's difficult. How do we do it? And that is a huge space for innovation and investment that I think is increasingly justified as nations embrace and implement blue economies. So hopefully I've wrapped two questions up. And I can give the mic to Andy for the very last question.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that okay, Andy?
Of course it is, Jonathan. Thank you very much. Very polite. So I'll read the last question now. If I can, my eyes are failing. Rodo Manulu, I think. What scheme do you suggest to substitute income for people that live in an MPA? As we know, many communities in Indonesia depend on their livelihood from resources. So a few things on that. First of all, I'd say it doesn't necessarily mean when you're designing it that anything has to be displaced. As we saw the great example in Indonesia, when you're setting up your MPA, you've understood that maybe the larger threat is from the commercial fleet and there are other parts of the sea for them to go, but let's allow the local artisanal fishers to continue with their livelihood building activities as long as it's in a sustainable way. So thinking through that. Other things that we're really interested in is that thing I picked up earlier on about co-location and multi-function projects that are coming into the blue economy and the sea space. So, for example, with the pressure on sea spaces, MPAs necessarily or others, for example, in integration of new aquaculture farms, Previously, it would be, oh, well, you have to stay well away from this because we don't want anyone interfering it. We're now seeing projects understanding that they want to be part of the local community, taking a real ethical view of it and trying to build tourism around it, get dive site, treating it as a dive site so you can come see the operations of it and building that into their co-located community embedded approach to developing marine infrastructure. More of that kind of stuff would be absolutely fantastic. And then the third thing, again, I always go back to strategy. It has to sit at that level. And if you are talking about a blue economy or an MPA as part of that, delivering against the national development goals, which should be set out and built on science and academia, if you know that job growth, for example, or food security or whatever else, whatever absolutely main thing to do, you would build that into your risk modeling for any new that goes into that water, MPAs being one of them. Because there's no point creating the environment if you then actually create just the conditions for criminality because they haven't got anywhere to go. And a lot of people on the local area catch fish illegally because they haven't got any other option. So if it doesn't get thought of strategically, it will become a problem. So again, it's hugely encouraging with all the questions today, all the right questions are in the room being asked at the right time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew and Jonathan. So maybe I would like to inform you also that Indonesia, especially our ministry, have program to prioritize the blue economy, to implement blue economy in long term, and also actually in our main performance indicators that marine protected area would be double. In our development plan will be double in 5 years. So I hope that the indicators will be reached in 5 years. Thank you. Okay, maybe this is for the end for our this session. So thank you very much to the speakers, to Mr. Andrew and Mr. Jonathan. For for the discussion, I believe that the expertise and experience you share will be important and beneficial for us. So let's give a warm applause to them. And once again, thank you very much. And now I will return the session to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you very much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now our training is coming to an end. And we hope that all the stakeholders bear the same vision and mission on this blue economy program. And last but not least, I would like to remind you for the audience on Zoom, do not forget to submit your presence on the link on room chat. Also fill the evaluation link. And we hope you have a nice day. Thank you for your attention. Sampai jumpa. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang. Om Shanti 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 Om.
I'm sorry for
I think so. Yeah. Coba dipoto. Siap.
We'll see you again. We're going to be around a lot. Okay.